2022 regular meeting of the TTSA Board of Directors to order. And we'll start with roll call and then go to pledge of allegiance.
Okay. Director Tresson.
Here.
Director Wilson.
Here.
Director Smelser.
Here.
President Wilkins.
Present.
And we have Director Cox on the phone, but he is only as attending as a member.
I'm present.
As a member of the public.
Okay, present but irrelevant.
Correct. Well, yes and no. I will not say that on record.
Okay. I can. Okay, thanks. And then if everyone can join me for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. First item on our agenda today is public comment. That's an opportunity for any member of the public to address the board for up to 5 minutes on any items not on the agenda. Do you have any public comment today? All right, seeing none, I'll close public comment. Next item on our agenda is actually to move to closed session. I wanted to make a suggestion to board members, recognizing that we've got our friends from the Truckee Fire Protection District here for item 7.2, which is a presentation on the regional training facility partnership with the Truckee Fire District, that we take that item first and then move back to closed session after that. You guys okay with that?
I'm okay.
Yeah, and maybe,
Yes.
I'm just curious, do we have folks here for the Achievement Award? So maybe we can add that one to it as well, let these guys get back to work
Right.
as well.
Great. So why don't we, thank you, Blake, if the other board members are okay with that.
It's good.
Why don't we go to the Achievement Awards first, and then we'll go to the regional training facility after that.
Thank you, and good morning, President Wilkins and Board of Directors. As we do monthly, I'd like to acknowledge several staff for their professional achievements, awards, and anniversaries for this past month or quarter. And first up, we have a new employee, and that is Michael Ramos. He is our new operator in training from our operations department. And we wanted to welcome Michael and have him say a little bit here in just a minute, if you don't mind, Michael. We also have an achievement, which is Dan Underwood. He received his wastewater treatment plant operator 2 certification and has thereby been promoted to an operator 2. Congratulations, Dan. Great job. And last but not least, we have Dawn Davis here today from our accounting department, and she is celebrating her 15-year anniversary in December. So great job, Dawn. And Michael, if you'd like to say a few words.
Mr. President and members of the board, I'm the new operator in training here. My name is Michael Ramos. I'm coming from Anaheim, California. I used to be a police officer down there, kind of decided to jump ship, and now I'm here. So I'm glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Great.
All right.
So yeah, just thanks to all of you. You're very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Next on our agenda, we'll move to item 7.2, which is the presentation and discussion regarding the regional training facility partnership with the Truckee Fire Protection District.
All right, thanks, President Wilkins and directors. Thanks for having us. For the record, my name is Kevin McKechnie. I'm the fire chief for the Truckee Fire Protection District. Here with me, I have our operations chief, Matt Parkhurst, and our training officer, Captain Eric Jetloff. So the purpose of our presentation today is to see if TTSA is interested in becoming a partner in the development of a regional training facility. In our region, we have about 300 first responders that would benefit from a training facility. Additionally, the training facility would be a great platform for interagency cooperation and network building that would serve us well in the event of a disaster. You know, when I think about what we deliver for our community as a Truckee Fire Protection District, I always arrive at the term preparedness. You know, we're continuously prepared to respond to and mitigate the emergencies that may happen in our community. And as you can imagine, there's a lot that goes into being prepared for the wide range of emergency events that may occur. A regional training facility would go a long way for developing and maintaining preparedness to respond. You know, we could perform live fire training, specialty rescue training, wildland fire training. We could use a facility for hose testing, pump testing, and ladder testing. We could also use a facility to test our fire investigation theories or perform live fire demonstrations for public education. But one of the most important uses would be to network with other providers like TTSA and cross-train for hazards specific to your facility. There's a multitude of uses for this regional asset, and that being said, it will take buy-in from several agencies and another signboard with lots of logos to get it done. When I think about these projects, I like to consider the future of our small or maybe not so small town. I suspect we'll see continued growth, expanded needs for service, and we'll also need more well-trained first responders to keep this place safe. And with that said, I believe a regional training facility will be a smart investment in our future. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Parkhurst. He has a visionary presentation on what this facility could look like, as well as some planning ideas to get us there.
Morning, directors. Thanks again for your time. As Chief McKechnie stated, I'm the operations chief, so I'm directly responsible for making sure all our troops, first responders, are trained adequately. And a regional training facility will help with that a lot. If you can go to the next slide. We'll go through a lot of it. I'm hoping to elicit a lot of questions and stuff for the end. Our primary goal for Regional Training Center is to provide that recurrent live fire training for all of our firefighters, and there's about 54 of our own line personnel. But this facility would also extend out to our JPA members, North Tahoe Fire, Squaw Valley or Olympic Valley Fire, North Star Fire, and other. We can expand it out even further than that. I think there's a lot of notes in the board packet about who we could actually service with this regional training center, as well as hopefully in the future initial recruit training, because it's a lot easier to turn a paramedic into a firefighter than a firefighter into a paramedic. Go to the next slide. So this is a picture of a proposed or a similar training facility that we look at. This particular model that you see there is called the Chief. It's a modular pre-built training tower. They're pretty economical to build because they come purpose-built. There's live fire props. They could either be live fire using, hay bales or things like that, or natural gas. It depends on what the Air Quality Resource Board would be able to approve for us and different things like that. But there's also, in addition to the 3 stories in this particular model, there's room for, if we partner with the Truckee Police Department, they can do active shooter drills and things like that inside of there. There's opportunities for RIC training, there's opportunities for extrication, breaching and breaking, roof prop, all that kind of stuff. Next slide. This is a picture that I threw up there. I don't want to give the wrong impression that a shooting range, outdoor, kind of elicits, sound complaints, this, that, and the other. But more than likely, it would be, if we partner with the Truckee Police Department, not only would they have a possible indoor shooting range at the facility, but they would also partner with us with the EVOC course. And EVOC is Emergency Vehicle Operation Course. Next slide. The rail car prop, as you know, one of our biggest target hazards within the Truckee Fire District is a long stretch of rail. It's been a long time since we've had a train rail, and I think I was 10 years old when we had the last train derailment in downtown Truckee, so knock on wood, but it's important to be prepared for that. And I have avenues. The 95th CST team, which we drill with on a yearly basis, they come up from Oakland, they're a military-based hazmat team, and Alex Efros, Major, he go, hey, you give me a place to put it, I'll get you a tank car. So in my mind, I've already kind of built the facility. I just need a place to put it. Next slide. In partnering with the Truckee Airport District, we would like to get ARF props down there. This is an example of a light jet prop. Currently, our firefighters have to go to San Bernardino for their training, which you can imagine is quite expensive for the district, and it takes time to get all of our firefighters, usually 2 at a time per year, through that training down there. Next slide. This is an example of something that's kind of real world. There's a lot of light aircraft that come in and out of Truckee, and they all have their unique issues, and it's important to do that live fire training with those. Next. Also, auto extrication area. You know, I-80 is another big target hazard that's within our district. Vehicle fires are an increasingly more difficult proposition with the advent of electric cars and whatnot. So, in addition to live fire drills with vehicles, there would be provisions for auto extrication practice as well. Next. So this is a good example of where we can partner with TTSA and do some combined training with our teams, our emergency responders, and yours with a chlorine prop, and we can practice together with that. The next slide shows a confined space prop, which also, rather than having to clean out your facility and do training there, you guys could come over to ours and we could join together and train together on a prop like that. It's clean and free from debris all the time, and we can just train together, that united training effort. Next one. Here's an example of that EVOC course I was talking about. Depending on the size of the facility that we get, it has provisions for a slick track, and this is where we can combine not only to all of our first responders in the fire service, but also our law enforcement partners as well. Next slide. This is what we currently do. This is from our insurance company, VFIS, and it's just a basic competency course that all of our firefighters go through once a year. We partner with TTAD to do a cone course, basically, but there's no slick track. There's no provisions for actually getting up to a speed to do the lane change or the collision avoidance maneuvers that we need to do. Next slide. So here's 2 examples. Hopefully you can kind of see those there. These I pulled off the internet, but they kind of show what a facility would look like. The lower right picture is really kind of desirable for us. You'll see that there's a pond there. As you know, one of the requirements in snow removal up here is all that snow and removal stuff goes to a settling pond. That's not only for that purpose, but when it freezes over for us in the wintertime, we can use it for ice rescue training, which is in our scope. As you know, one of our target hazards is the frozen lakes around our district. In the summertime, it provides provision for drafting for wildland fire practice when firefighters have to draft out of a water source. And then, of course, the EVOC course kind of goes around the outside of the facilities. And then there's provisions for classrooms. There's provisions for the burn building. So the next slide. So we often get asked, what's the best use of the land that will serve the most people directly or indirectly? That's kind of where we're combining your very large service area with the airport's very large service area, all of our combined fire districts, all of that kind of stuff into that area. Next slide. So here's just some of the potential partners. Yourselves, of course, the Truckee Airport, us, the Town of Truckee Police Department, North Tahoe Fire, North Star Fire, Olympic Valley Fire, and of course Southwest Gas. They have been very generous with providing. At Station 92, we do a live fire drill every year there, and we actually have a lot of the surrounding districts come over and do a gas meter on fire. It's a live fire drill. They've actually plumbed that station on Donner Pass Road to have provisions for that large quantity of fuel, and it's unmetered. That's on their dime, and we're hoping to partner with them to do the same thing at that regional training facility. Next slide. So the planning for production, of course, there's a huge planning stage, and this is just the one little step to kind of get people excited about the project. There's the funding aspect of it. All the fire districts combined right now between us, North Tahoe Fire, Olympic Valley Fire, and North Star, we've got about $1 million ready to go right now. And, based on how things go, we can bring more money to the table. Then there's the design phase, the strategy with the different stakeholders and contributors, and then, of course, the launch. Next slide. So just kind of an estimated timeline. Like I said, this is very preliminary. 2020, we'd like to really nail down a place or a location for it. 2023, of course, is the design phase. based on the size of the land. You know, my Christmas present would be to get a large piece so we could incorporate all those things. 2023, we identify the budget needs and the funding sources. 2023-24 begin the infrastructure in the first phase in a really kind of a phased approach with the training facility, and then 2024 at least having the training tower being constructed. Next. So like I mentioned, we'd like to do a phased approach. In the first phase, we'd at least like to get the training tower up and running, maybe an ARF prop and the gas props with natural gas and LPG. Truckee Police Department and TTSA would also be involved with either having the shooting range and the confined space prop. Next. And then in the second phase, are, you know, expanding on those fire facilities with addition of an AVOC course. We'll add some classrooms, get those bigger tank car props. TTSA, again, more chlorine props, 1-ton cylinders and things like that. And then just keep expanding with more and more applicable props. Next. So as I touched on a little bit before in the planning phase, there's going to be a lot of planning that goes involved with it because we have to, you know, take into all the considerations with air quality, noise, all that kind of stuff. The finance is going to be a huge component of that, in addition to our budget and what we have to bear and all the surrounding districts can bring to the table. We'd seek Homeland Security grants. I'm hoping to leverage the FAA's power for those the FAA, the aviation-related props and whatnot. And then, of course, the implementation. And that's just the slow growth of it and whatnot like that. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Chief McKechnie.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chief Parkhurst. Nicely done. So I think a fair question would be why this? Why now? You know, what's changed? In order to answer that question, I think we need to go back in time a little bit. As you may know, Truckee Fire was an all-volunteer fire department up until 1988. Excuse me. Firefighters were members of the community, and in many cases, they were service providers as their day jobs. You know, we had Craig Harvey, Rocco Moore, Paul Spencer, and who could forget little Joe Aguirre, right? They were all sanitary district workers, but they're also volunteer firefighters. There's several similar examples of cross-trained, multi-talented individuals with the hospital, schools, airport, PUD, and right here at the sewer plant, who also volunteered as first responders. These service providers and firefighters provided that valuable connection between agencies that unfortunately no longer exists. Truckee Fire, as with our regional partners, is now a 100% career fire department. Many of our firefighters commute to work from far away, and with that, we have lost this agency connection and some of that local knowledge. And so I'd like to close with a story of connection between TTSA and Truckee Fire. It's the story of my dad, Don McKechnie. He worked for TTSA for 20 years and was a volunteer firefighter for Truckee Fire. He managed the laboratory here and was very comfortable handling dangerous chemicals, and for that reason, he became the fire district's hazmat guy. When the Best Western burned down from a suspected arson fire, he participated in the investigation by sampling the runoff and testing it for ignitable liquids. When the fire district was looking to send someone to the National Fire Academy for the newly required firefighter hazmat training, they naturally selected my dad, and TTSA participated in the funding and compensation for that training. So with that, I believe there's this small ember of collaboration between TTSA and Truckee Fire, and I think we can rekindle that into this regional training facility. And so thank you for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Kevin.
You bet.
Does staff have any comments or follow-up to the fire district's presentation?
The only comment I have is we met with Chief McKechnie and we had the initial discussion. I think staff is very receptive to the regional training facility. We see a great benefit for our staff and being a partner in that. So I'd like to share that.
Okay. Thanks. So I think what's being asked for today is, I don't believe anyone's asking for formal action. I think my understanding is that the fire district wants to, I guess, take the temperature of TTSA and the board and see if there's a general interest in this possibility and to get some very preliminary feedback that, either in the positive or the negative, so you can kind of evaluate, what the best path forward is from there. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. So with that, I'll bring the conversation back to the board. Does any board members want to jump in with any initial thoughts or comments?
Well, location is what interests me most. I went to firefighting school down on Treasure Island, and I can remember the huge clouds of smoke we put up, sent over to Oakland. So I'm just wondering, where are we going to put this, and who will affect? We've got a lot of land here, and maybe we're looking at that, but I'm thinking groundwater and concerns along those lines.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions or thoughts by the board members?
The one thing from the initial thing that was sent out didn't mention anything about the indoor shooting range or the active shooter drills. And I believe you said it was going to be an indoor range.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ultimately, we would go through the town's planning process, and that's going to be a development permit, and so all these uses would need to go through the public process with transparency, and we would seek input and on how those facilities would be designed and used, maybe on the timing or of course all the noise studies and air quality studies, water quality studies. Those would all be taken care of as part of the normal planning process. We don't intend to shortcut any of those, and we want to build a robust facility. And so I think basically at this point, again, we're just kind of building this partnership group and seeing who wants to be invested in this. We think it's a great idea. We think it's multi-use. It's your agency, my agency, it's law enforcement, CHP. I happened across some CHP officers qualifying out at the Boca Range, right? We've all probably shot out there, and it's pretty informal, pretty rustic to run across a CHP officer and his qualifying examiner, and they got their metal target set up, and so I think it would be great to put them here. As I understand it, Truckee PD goes to a shooting range in Nevada in Pyramid. So it's just one of the ideas. It's not necessarily set in stone, but again, just trying to build that partnership and identify these uses that would be beneficial to the community. So still really pretty preliminary.
Okay. Blake, I'm sorry, Scott.
Yeah. One of the other things that I was looking at was basically the 5 agencies. So this might be moving down the road a little bit, but agencies out of maybe Plymouth County, I assume that they're having to send their people to distant places. Would this be an opportunity for them to send their first responders?
And I think we would put it out there, but I think it might be governed by the use permit, based on the land and the permitting process, and so I could see that being allowed or prohibited potentially. I mean, it would be great to have that partnership, I think, from my standpoint, and to be able to network and build that. But if due to population or whatever, traffic use, it could also be written out such that it wouldn't be used. It could be, to spin it the other way, it could be generate revenue. And so we might have this facility and ask for them to participate and maybe pay a little fee to use it. And so it could help with the operational costs as well. So I think that can kind of go a little bit either way. But I think one of our things is to align, say, your boundaries with this local fire protection and law enforcement. Your boundaries are, of course, much bigger, and we sort of feel the impact of the plant here in Truckee. But this helps you guys touch base with, say, North Tahoe, Olympic Valley, North Star, and whatnot. So,
if I could add something as well, one of the things that is a great cost is as career firefighters go from firefighter 1, 2, and they go through officer schools. There's a lot of command classes, and it's just a classroom thing. It's not necessarily live fire. There's a lot of other things that go into that. And there's a cost benefit to hosting classes, because a lot of times we can offer those classrooms to our firefighters at a reduced cost. We fill the classroom, and then invite other, reach out people from Roseville, Sacramento can come up and attend those classes. And it's just a simple classroom thing that it's a huge cost benefit for our district as well. And we can offset the cost of the whole facility by hosting those.
Because it's got to be pretty expensive to send people to San Bernardino.
Oh, yeah.
Over the course of the year.
Yeah, very expensive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin and Matt, for the presentation. I'm glad to see you guys thinking ahead. Sounds like, ideally a great thing to have in our community. TTSA was created with quite a bit of property, buffer lands around the treatment plant. I think to ensure that we don't have impacts that could negatively impact our operations. You guys are well aware that we have gaseous chlorine on site. We have a effluent criteria that we have to meet to protect the Truckee River. That's the groundwater, and protecting the groundwater upstream of that is important because other impacts can end up influencing our final effluent. I think the agency, since it was formed in the 70s, has been extremely protective of its buffer lands and not allowing encroachment. I think over time, I'm sure there's been a lot of demands. Land is valuable, and ever more so with the growth that we've seen up here. We allowed the bus barn to build their facility, a decade or so ago. I think that's worked out really well. I just think there's a lot of stuff we have to take into consideration, in demands on our property. I had seen, maybe not with the EVOC course and all that, but a similar kind of tower facility proposed kind of on Jorger Drive, but up closer to the Rayleighs intersection there. I'm curious, is that site no longer being considered by the fire district? Why have you guys potentially moved from that original location?
Yeah, and we don't want to take anything off the table. That site's still on the table for us. We're going to be presenting to the airport board this afternoon. But that site was part of this multi-agency, multi-site planning study. It paired us up with the aquatic invasive species. I'm hearing different things. It sounds like that AIS, aquatic invasive species, may be coming back with the water quality issues with Donner Lake. So we may end up they may be a partner on our sign and as well. But that site, I think it just had some challenges from our standpoint and being kind of conspicuous up there by Rayleighs and sort of above the bluff for our activities and what we intend to use it for with emergency vehicles and potentially some smoke and some other things. The other thing I always felt that it's just not well connected to the infrastructure. I think is maybe we understand the bus barn has really good connections for water, power, gas, communications. Whereas that, I think everything would have to be brought in, and I'm just constantly aware of the cost to, say, extend utilities or deliver service. So I think that was a downside. It's conspicuous. But again, we're not taking anything off the table, at this point.
And I'd like to address your buffer zone, because I think a training facility down there would be a good way to protect that buffer zone down there, because then you wouldn't have to, we would not want to see high density population apartment complexes there, because as you know, 90% of aircraft incidents happen within 5 miles of the airport. So I think there's kind of a shared desire for that buffer zone, and we talked about the best use of that land. And that would kind of accomplish both of those things. It would protect anything from going there that's high population, and it would also benefit the airports right away as well.
Matt, you talked about your ideal Christmas present. If you got what size? What is your sort of minimum footprint versus your sort of ideal build-out sort of footprint that you're looking for your facilities?
That's a great question, because when we partnered with the airport district, there was kind of a 5-acre plot there with the aquatic invasive species track going around the outside of it, and it kind of constrained us. But beggars can't be choosers, and ideally the Christmas present would be like from the old Martis Dam Road to the bus barn. But we'll take what we can get. Like if you look at the we've trained at the TMCC facility off of Dandini Boulevard in Reno. I don't know if you are familiar with that size. That's a little bit bigger than 5 acres, but not quite as much as you have there. And like I said, part of that planning is kind of making what we have available, what land or where the ultimate location would be, what can we fit in there most efficiently.
And I'm just curious, Kevin, have you guys thought about, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but if, assuming the board is amenable and staff doesn't see problems with it and we wanted to pursue this, what kind of land ownership arrangement are you guys thinking about for this property? Is it is it going to become fire district property? Are you going to, the bus barn is still TTSA's property, there's a lease agreement for that. I'm just curious what you envision.
I envision it would still be TTSA property. We would enter into a lease. We may own the improvements to a certain extent, or some version of that, but it would still be your land, and we would have a lease agreement which would constrain that use, our use, entitle you to specific uses. Yeah, so it'd all be written into a lease. I don't know that we would want to own it in perpetuity for any reason. It's the public's land, or my land's the public's land. So, and there could be a different use down the road, presumably.
When you mentioned partnerships, I didn't hear you really mention Reno or Sparks, and it didn't sound like you were going down there. It's a larger metropolitan area. Do they have a lot of these facilities for their fighters, or
yeah, they have
also benefit from something up here?
No, they have their own facility. I don't know that they would want to come and use ours per se, except for maybe the classroom portion. A little close travel for an officer class, an incident command class or something like that. They would certainly come up for that and participate. They do have the facility at Dandini Boulevard that Chief Parker's mentioned. There's also a facility down at Carson City. It's adjacent to their airport, and that's where we currently go for live fire training. We just did it a couple weeks ago. Captain Jitloff executed that for us, and gets those guys in there. Yeah.
I guess the last one is more of a just discussion point for us. We've seen some requests for TTSA property, but I know that there are other ones out there. The town is, for quite a long time is interested in relocating some of the industrial uses along West River Street to redevelop that area, looking for a home for those. I've had conversations with the town manager about that, and I guess, while I like the idea of, if we're going to make our land available, using it for the bus barn and other public agency, it seems very consistent with our sort of public service message, but we have to recognize that there are possibly other demands in wanting to not do it in a vacuum. And I think one of your first slides talked about what's the best possible use of this land for the community. What are we really doing, and making sure that we, perhaps have. I'm not sure how to go about doing that. I don't really want to have an open house where everybody comes in and pitches the dog park versus, the industrial reuse. But just for us to be cognizant that there's other uses, and as Matt indicated, possibly this type of use could create additional needs for buffer. You're not going to want necessarily some uses next to a shooting range and stuff like that. So we just have to take that in consideration. But I think, if you're looking for a level of interest, I think I'm interested in, I'm not sure what the next step is on our part, but I think we should continue to explore this. I think we need to talk to staff and really get their feedback. I know that one thing we haven't mentioned is future expansion of our effluent is, I don't know how many acres we have of subsurface, basically leach fields where the final effluent goes in. At some point, those existing leach fields are going to foul and need to be relocated and make sure that we're not, again, citing anything in an area that we need for that demand later. We don't want to regret that. We're going to be here in perpetuity. We got to make sure we don't, in the short term, make a mistake that really hamper our ability to perform our function in the long term.
Okay.
Can I chime in, Blake, or Mr. Chairman?
Hey, so Dale, yes, but in a minute, just because technically, I guess you're here as a member of the public. So what I'd like to do is kind of finish up the board comments, and I'll go straight to public comment, and then have you chime in then. Would that work?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what happened is the agenda didn't get noticed with you being in a remote location today. And because of that, and because we didn't do the whole COVID finding thing, that's why you're a member of the public instead of a voting member today.
I'm okay with that, Chairman.
Okay, thanks.
I was just going to mention that I think, Dave, you brought up a key point, and you also alluded to it, the location of this. I mean, I think that makes it a little more complicated. And, as I'm looking at the map of it, to the point where it's adjacent to where people are going to be and things like that, I think that, to me, that's like the critical, maybe, first step to think about anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm really in approval of the whole idea, and I think it'd be a great benefit to the agency. Enclosed and all the training we could get out of it. But the concern is, you're just going through the slides and seeing what's on the ground around the firefighting and training and stuff. I would want to see some way of making sure that that's all collected. And not into the groundwater, because that's going to influence us. I think about how our area, and we've already been talking about a year ago or something about the acidity of the soil, and the groundwater picks that up, and we're here dumping chemicals in to bring the acidity back up or down. So that concerns me. I would want to know, a lot more about what we're doing here.
Okay. So I've got a couple thoughts. So, I think in general, I think TTSA owns about 1,000 acres of land, maybe 1,200.
Seven, some change.
I think it was 700, and now it's 900. So around 1,000, somewhere short of 1,000.
Okay, only 700 acres. So I think there's opportunity, for this. I think there's a lot of detail to be worked through. It wasn't clearly spelled out in the presentation, but I think what's being asked is, or maybe it's a question for Kevin, is the question, would TTSA consider providing land at no cost or at minimal cost for this kind of a facility? Or is it that, or would TTSA consider providing land at fair market value, or would TTSA consider providing land and funding to help fund the facility?
I think the third one. Yeah, no. So I think we really need this agency partnership to get this done. I think we really need TTSA to be invested in it. We do think it is the right piece of land. We think that we would ask that you guys invest and advocate for your fire department and your emergency responders, and sort of coming at it from that standpoint and looking for this alignment. I do think there's alignment. We could look for some water quality alignment. One of the biggest threats to our community is catastrophic wildfire, which would have an extreme impact on water quality. And so making sure that you're tied in and sort of checking some of those boxes. I think you guys are great with your hazardous materials, but I do think we need to be better networked there, better understand that hazard and be able to interface better. I got a ton of respect for the work you guys do out here and your protective actions. I read through some of the other last month's board meeting and just the stuff on relocating fire extinguishers and painting curbs and stuff. And so I really respect that you guys are advocating for safety, but I would like to see some better networking with the local responders. And you know, we're small, you know, and I think one of our downfalls is we don't advocate for ourselves as well as we possibly should. And so we need the community to advocate on our behalf and say, yeah, we need to have this and to help drive it a little bit. So we are looking for, I think, the bigger end of participation. We definitely don't have the funding to purchase land. Land would be one thing. I did want to open it up as a really broad question, though. You're right, I didn't specifically state the ask. And so we're sort of gauging interest from partners and seeing what you might be able to bring to the table with that encouragement to advocate for your first responders.
Okay, thanks. And then another question, are you seeing Truckee Fire as the project lead? I'm assuming that's the case by virtue of the fact that you're taking the lead on the presentation, but I mean, do you see a scenario where there's some other entity that ends up taking the lead on the project? Because it sounds simple, but these things are always complex. Right. You have to come up with money to hire engineers and consultants and go through the environmental planning process, and that all takes time, and it takes resource to pursue that. So, is that resource that you're seeing coming from the fire district, or are you seeing that coming from somewhere else?
I think that we would take the lead on it, and we would likely try to leverage any other elements that, say, you may have, or the airport, water district, sanitary district, because I know you guys are networked with these architects and engineers and processes, probably much more than we are. But I think we would need to take the lead. I think the fire district would be the lead agency for this. We would be sort of responsible for any of the submittals and the phased approach, and but again, kind of looking to leverage some of those other skill sets that we know are out there.
Right, and then obviously, leveraging grants, construction funding, that's a significant effort. So
yeah, I imagine this unique lease with TTSA, several MOUs, sort of on who's taking care of what and who's funding it. Of course, the consultants like to get paid, and they like to make sure that and we want to make sure before we enter into any agreements that the funding's available. And so who's paying for it, and who's going to take the lead on it.
Okay.
But I think we would take the lead.
Okay, thanks. So just some initial thoughts from my perspective, and then I'll see if there's any other director comments, and we'll go to public comments so we can hear from Dale. From my perspective, TTSA as a land owner, it's pretty easy for me to get to a point where if we can find an acceptable location that kind of addresses some of the interests and concerns that we have, and then making that land available for a project like this, I can get there pretty quickly. Taking a few $100,000 out of our budget to fund a facility, the construction or the planning of a facility like that, that's a much higher hurdle for me to get over. Just when I think about what the agency's mission and core responsibilities are, we're going to be embarking on a rate study in the not too distant future. So, we're going to have to think about, do we want to build in dollars that we pass on through our sewer treatment rates to our customers? Can we justify that for a regional kind of emergency response training facility? That may be a challenge. So I just offer that from my perspective. I'm just one director on that. I think the other thing, I think this is a laudable project. I think it's a heavy lift, especially. It's one thing if you've landed some $5 million at a mothership grant that you got a bunch of money and you can go hire consultants and make it all happen. things can move pretty quickly. And that could happen, it sounds like. But I know a lot of times when you're trying to piece together a few $100,000 here, a few $100,000 there, multiple agencies, things move slowly, they take time, they take a lot of resource. One of the things I would be very cautious of from a TTSA standpoint is for us to be too involved in that piece of it, right? I think, again, if we're providing a site for a facility like this, I think that has a lot of benefit. I think if, for instance, we asked Jay to roll up his sleeves and start being part of the site planning and the project development team, that's a whole nother kind of level of investment that's effectively kind of pulling us away from a lot of the other projects that we have. So that's something I would probably be cautious of as well, just as one director. So anyway, those are some initial thoughts from me on this. Before I go to public comment, are there other questions or comments from board members before we go to Dale?
I just had one, and Kevin, I was just curious. Truckee is surrounded by Forest Service land. We've got a fairly large fire presence from CAL FIRE and the Forest Service. Also, with facilities, is that an option also to site a facility like this? I know you can't build housing necessarily on Forest Service land, but a firefighting facility generally oriented towards that is that an option? And partnering, I didn't hear really the Forest Service mentioned so much as a partner in this project either. But I wonder if you've explored. Just wondering whether you've explored that option as well.
Yeah, we haven't really explored that. I think we would include Forest Service if they wanted to be a partner and allow them to use the facility. But as far as their land or anything like that, we hadn't really thought about that. I don't know. Having worked with the Forest Service, I don't know that they would. It would be hard to get there for them, and
plus the infrastructure.
Yeah,
of it. There's no power, gas.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions or comments from board members before I go to public comment? Seeing none. Okay, let's go to public comment. Anyone who would like to provide public comment? Dale?
Yeah, this issue of a training facility has come before the board maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and it was at that time universally accepted by members of the board. But when I was thinking about a training facility, gentlemen, I was thinking and had in my mind a concept like what you see off 395 as you travel north out of Reno, the cement structure that I see from time to time, various fire departments training there and utilizing a cement structure that I would assume meets the needs of the training. But what I see presented here is not just a facility, it's a complex that would be much more than what I ever anticipated as a training facility. And when I look at what's been presented, I see a facility that would be greatly used and it would become a very busy place. That's the first comment. The second comment is to chime in on what you said, Blake, about our SAT system, our ground treatment facility that we want to make sure that we have space for in case we have an anomaly with our existing SAT system that would require us to expand to another location. The third thing is David Smeltzer's comment about when you have a facility that has been proposed and you're fighting a concept of jet fuel and all this other kind of waste that could be discharged into our aquifer. That would be a major concern. And finally, gentlemen, we have unfinished business with the airport district that we have to, as soon as possible, get in the rearview mirror before we really start addressing any other agencies or governmental bodies that are coming to the agency for use of our land. And, you know, the last time here a few years ago, we had the green waste people for utilizing the wood chips and creating a facility, and we've got to be very conscious of the reason we acquired the amount of real estate we did around our facility. And, you know, what I see as a concept as presented by Truckee fire people, this is far bigger than what I would anticipate as being something that TTSA should get involved in. And once again, we got a lot of irons in the fire that has been lingering for a very long time with the airport district. I want to see all those T's crossed and I's dotted, and I want to move on with what we've got on the books in progress right now that has taken up agency time. So this is something that I would endorse as a director. However, the size and scope of what's been presented far overreaches what I would see as something that I would get behind as far as a complex. A small facility is one thing, but when you put together indoor shooting ranges and conference or training centers and all the things that I see in the presentation, it makes me very nervous. No further comment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And just to make sure I'm understanding your comment, I think you're referring to the land exchange contract that we currently have with the airport district, where TTSA...
That is correct.
Okay, where TTSA, and for your benefit, Kevin, TTSA and the airport district entered into a contract a couple of years ago to exchange chunks of land, and we're waiting on some things to get work their way through the airport district for that to get finalized. So I think what I heard Dale saying is he'd like to see that finalized before we enter into other land agreements. So feel free to mention that to the airport board when you meet with them this afternoon.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah.
Well, we can chew gum and mow at the same time.
I think we can. Yeah.
You guys are probably aware of the land ownership out there. I mean, that land, Matt, that you were talking about off the road to the dam, most of that flat land is currently owned by the airport district. It's not TTSA property, but we're in that exchange agreement where we would acquire that, and in exchange we'd be trading property that's kind of on the wooded hillside to the west of the existing bus barn, kind of across the street from TSD's facility. And yeah, that's been in the works for quite a few years.
Right. So I think what I've heard is general interest by the board in pursuing this conversation further. We've heard a few items, I think, from individual board members that would be of interest to them to have better understanding on, before we ink any land deals. And I haven't heard anything that's just a flat out stop working on it, stop spending time on it. And I do think, to come back to one of Blake's comments, there may be some work we as an agency want to do to think about, of the lands we own, which areas are we receptive to something other than the current passive open space uses on. Because we do have so much land. I mean, a facility like this could be, you could feasibly put it, right out at the intersection of Butterfield Drive and Georgia Drive. That's one approach versus, no, we want it as far away from the plant as possible. And that's probably some thinking we should do as an agency of, of some of the land we've got, if we're contemplating a use like this on it, or potentially some other types of uses, what areas do we think are most appropriate for that and least likely to create conflicts with agency business? Not sure what the best process is to, for that, but I think some board discussion kind of outside of a specific project proposal that's maybe happening concurrently with other projects that are being developed would make a lot of sense, because if you all get to a point where you decide to start spending hard dollars on design engineers, you need to tell them what area you're asking them to do design work on.
Right.
It sounds like you're not at that point yet. It sounds like you're kind of working towards that point. That may be maybe a bit into the future before you're there.
But I think still a good step in the process is to have that, what's the best piece from your perspective, and how big is that?
Right.
Matt's got his Christmas list, but
yeah, right. Tell him this.
Just to reiterate that those, that's like my ideal training facility, because it would be all things to all agencies. But like I said, beggars can't be choosers. If you can afford us 5 acres, we can just do a natural gas training tower, and all the aviation props to address Dale's comments are not Jet A. They're all, natural gas, and of course, like the chief mentioned, they'd all be compliant with Air Quality Resource Board, water quality. I even had a question once: can we use your affluent to train? Because we're just using that water, drafting out of the pond or drafting out of the wherever. Like, can we go somewhere and fill up our engines with your affluent and use that to train with? So that could be a possibility as well. I don't know enough about, other than the elementary school trip I came to out here, and they actually drank the affluent. So I don't know the rest of it.
Did they feed that to the elementary school kids?
They showed that's how clean the process was. So I was impressed with that. It stuck with me.
I like the direction you're headed, Dan. I think, perhaps a more generic agendized item, and I think maybe we would invite you guys to come and want to sit on that and potentially provide some input if it's related. And I think that it's important. I think the town is the other entity, public entity, that has shown interest, and I'd be curious to, invite possibly Jen or the town manager or somebody to also share some perspective of what they see also, because they've been interested also. So we have that vision. I don't know, everything else is, I guess Parks and Rec always wants to build ball fields and stuff like that, but we might reach out and see what those demands are out there. I think your desires are really commendable, and but I think it's important for us to know what else is going on, so we make an
If I could make a comment on that, I know that when we need to include those partners in the town planning, like we mentioned just briefly about protecting that buffer zone. We also would not like to see a target hazard be developed, because like we said, we have a lot of target hazards in the district. The railroad, you certainly have a certain bit of that as a target hazard. We wouldn't want to see a large apartment complex being built in the airway or those potential areas, because like I said, statistically speaking, most aircraft incidents happen within 5 miles of the airport. So that would be, we have that same share of protecting that buffer zone on your lands.
Okay.
No, I kind of Dale's comments and things about, it's kind of tough to get me to agree to do anything like that, because you've got bare land out there, what you got. And like I said, from the pictures of the training, I'm wondering how much stuff gets in the ground. I mean, you design that so was all contained, I'm sure, but that would be my biggest concern, is where you put it. Is it upstream from our facility, and are we going to be impacted? That's the main thing. I actually like the idea of the facility, and another benefit to the community, if it became a popular training facility, you'd be dragging people in from outside. That they'd be staying someplace, they'd be eating. It would be an economic benefit to the community. I see that. A lot of good things. I'm just scared.
Sounds like
Groundwater.
the idea. There's some things that are important to make sure that are done properly, so we don't
Designed
inadvertently
into it,
create problems.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, so if it pleases the board, staff can work with Chief McKechnie and his staff to identify some usable land that doesn't infringe on future SAT fields or future treatment, and then we can schedule a follow-up discussion item with the board to present those areas that would meet their needs size-wise, would meet our needs as far as location-wise. We can answer some of those low-hanging fruit type questions on water runoff and provide some follow-up on that to answer those questions if you'd like.
I think that's helpful, but I think I also heard some interest in potentially a larger conversation as well. That it's potentially beyond just the training facility we're talking about, but something that's a little more generic and maybe a little more strategic.
I'd be happy to reach out to Jen at the town and schedule a meeting with her and see what are they envisioning in the future.
Right, but I can also see, like, we own land, there's zoning designations on it. I haven't really looked that closely at what they are. There's airport flight safety zones that have been established that overlay our land. Those are things that should affect our thinking. There's future physical use of the land that we could foresee. There's also, I'll call it safety setback considerations in terms of, because of the fact that we do use liquid chlorine here. If we were to have a incident there, there's benefit to not having activity close by, but that's a very low probability issue that could come up, but a high severity issue. So I think it's kind of like layering those different, kind of getting a single snapshot of what all those considerations are, and taking that into account when we're having these other, and potentially identifying as an agency, there's some area over next to TTS or the TSD area, or maybe not, maybe it's out of the old tanker pit. What areas would we contemplate non-open space uses? It's a little more of a generic conversation that goes beyond just the specific proposal that's in front of us. And I think that's a different conversation, but related.
Understood.
Yeah.
So I'd say two items, one specific to this, one complete land assessment.
Right.
With those parameters you laid out,
right.
Airport approach, areas that we want to have set aside for safety buffer or future, and give you a complete map of all of our land, and then that way you kind of can take a look at it and say, here's what's designated for what, and maybe used for different open use.
Right.
On the right track there.
I think so, and then that provides, I think so. From my perspective, I think that would be a useful effort. I don't know, do other board members agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the work done now is going to pay dividends in the future when these come up.
Right.
And if, Kevin, you have, have sharpened your pencil more and can superimpose on an aerial map, more specificity of your use, and hearing some of our concerns, maybe have, talk about the answers to that. If there's an individual item around specifically about moving your project forward, I think that's reasonable as well to come back.
Yeah, we want to just emphasize that we're modular. We're 100% modular. We could start pretty small, and it could be the training tower and a shade structure, and then we kind of be up and running a fire hydrant, and we're out there having fun. But it's totally modular, totally build to suit, and I think we can build that into any agreement as well. That everything needs to be revisited at the planning level before we expand.
So sounds like you're envisioning that the facility, if it comes to fruition, there's a high likelihood that it would be phased.
Oh yeah.
So you'd have a kind of a master plan and a phase one, and then any number of other phases that could plug and play.
Yeah.
Based on funding availability.
Funding, demand, need, benefit, all that stuff. If it works and gets some synergy, then it'd be great to get something going. But we can start small too.
Right.
Yeah, I think that training facility it's modular, and it comes on a truck, and you build a foundation, and they set it up in a couple afternoons.
And some other examples, like the Dandini Boulevard one that you can see off the freeway, that one has water collection for, even though it's a natural gas produced flame effects, all of the water that's used for firefighting is then treated or reused sometimes. And like when I mentioned the shooting range, it was just the more people that can use the facility, the more dollars come to bear, not only for the initial production of it, but for future maintenance, all those kind of things that occur with that. So the more participation we have, we can shoulder that throughout all of our budgets and not just one.
Right. One other curiosity, you mentioned that potentially there could be some revenue generated by effectively leasing the facility to other entities. When you guys go down to San Bernardino now, do you pay for the use of the facilities there, or is it through a mutual aid agreement where you get free use of it?
Yeah, they're the host agency, and we pay them a pretty exorbitant amount. Not only is their lodging, but the course itself pays to offset their fuel costs, because that's a natural gas prop in large aircraft facility. And then for additional revenue, like we currently pay the Carson City training facility for the use of their facility, or if we go and use the Dandini facility, there's a cost associated with just using the facility. For cost offsetting, like a company like ICS that provides classes like hazmat, technician level 1, hazmat specialist, things like that. You can imagine, I think Director Smeltzer just touched on the lodging aspect of it. If we're a host facility for a simple class like ICS or a hazmat 1 class, and people are coming up, this is a very desirable place to come for class, because they're in class for 8 hours a day, but what do they do after that? And they're certainly not going to drive home. So there's revenue generating, not only that offsets our facility costs, because we're essentially renting the classroom to that, but then like my envision of this, because like I said, my passion is training and newer recruits and the next generation of firefighters, is maybe we could even reach out to Sierra College and get school dollars if they wanted to host an academy here. I mean, that's grand scheme, and I don't want to scare anybody by doing that, because like Chief McKechnie said, it's a modular design. We can put on site what services our needs, and those training dollars are directly related to a return on taxpayers, because the more we train, the better credit we get towards ISO rating. Currently, we don't get full credit for our live fire. Like it was mentioned to me, it's like you don't want, for instance, if you crash an airplane, you don't want that firefighter that's coming up to rescue you to be the first time he's seen a Cessna door mechanism. You don't want it to be the first time he's seen live fire. You don't want it to be the first time he's seen confined space, or he's seen a one-ton cylinder that's leaking. So that training component for me is directly related to the safety of my troops, and it's passionate.
It sounds like the notion of leasing these facilities to other partner agencies for revenue to help cover the cost of operations and recover the capital cost is normal in the industry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have, as you were talking about the cost and how much it costs to go down One thing that I'm thinking is insurance on a piece of property like this has got to be, I would suspect, pretty high. I don't know. Who would be the agency that would be responsible for the insurance?
Yeah, I think we would cover the insurance. Yeah, we would insure it, and it would be written into our lease. And yeah, we do dangerous work all day long, so
Exactly.
we know about expensive insurance. You know, the insurance got so high they had to close some fire departments on Western Nevada County. So we're dealing with Commissioner Lara and Supervisor Bullock on some of that stuff. But yeah, insurance is a struggle. Okay, so I think staff, you feel like you've got adequate direction on this item?
I do.
Okay. All right, thanks for your time, gentlemen. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so go back on our agenda. So item 3 on our agenda is closed session. Three closed session items for public employee performance evaluation, the interim general manager. Second one is closed session regarding public employee appointment of the general manager. And then the last one is opportunity for labor negotiators, Trezin and Wilkins, to have additional conversation with the board about the general manager. So, with that, I'd like to adjourn to closed session. For members of the public who are in the room or remotely, where the board is back out of closed session, I'll ask Richard to do the closed session report out.
Yes, there's nothing to report back from the closed session discussion.
Thank you, Dick. And then we'll now move on to item 4 on the Board of Directors meeting agenda, which is consideration of approval of a general manager employment agreement and appointment of Richard Palante as the general manager. So there was as part of the agenda package, there was a draft contract to hire Richard Palante as the general manager for the TTSA board. The contract is for a 3-year term. It included information about compensation and severance and a few other relevant items. Do any board members, and then I know there's some formalities that we need to ask Mr. Shanahan to cover for us before we get further into the conversation. So I'll turn it over to you, Dick.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. State law requires that before the board act for this type of general manager employment agreement that it be orally summarized, so I will do that briefly. The agreement would appoint Mr. Palante as agency general manager. It would take effect on December 1 and terminate on November 30, 2025, unless otherwise terminated earlier. It would provide for a starting salary at step 3 of the GM salary schedule, which currently is $213,741 per year. It would allow him the use of a district vehicle, vacation of 30 days per year, and other employee benefits as other full-time employees receive. The agreement contains a termination provision on how it could be terminated early, including a provision that the agency could terminate without cause for payment of 6 months severance, and it includes, at the conclusion, legal sort of standard boilerplate, and that concludes the summary of the contract.
All right. Thanks, Dick. So again, a copy of the full contract was in the board packet. Do any board members have any questions or comments on this item?
I'll move to, is it approve, adopt?
Approve and appoint.
Approve and appoint Richard Palante as general manager according to the terms of the employment agreement.
No,
Thank
second.
you. So we've got a motion and a second. Before we have, is there any further discussion with the board before I go to public comment? Further board discussion? Okay, so we've got a motion and a second on the table. Before we take action on that, we will go to public comment. Is there any member of the public who'd like to offer comment on this item? You with us there, Dale?
I'm with you, no comment.
No comment? Okay. Okay, with that, I'll go ahead and close public comment and then bring it back to a vote. I guess we don't have to do roll call voting, right? Because we're all in person?
Yes, that's
Okay. So those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? What's that?
Sorry, go ahead. I'll let you finish, sorry.
And none opposed.
Motion approved.
Motion approved. All right, thank you. Congratulations, Richard.
Thank you.
All right, now that that's settled, item 6 is our consent agenda. So these are items, we've got 2 items on consent: ratification of the general fund warrants and approval of the financial statements. Is there any member of the board who would like to pull anything from consent? Any member of the public who'd like to pull anything? Oh, Blake.
We had kind of some abbreviated finance committee meetings, so I did have a couple quick questions. They may be for Crystal or for staff, just regarding the payment of funds.
You got to pull it from consent.
Or the warrants, if that's what we need to do to have that discussion, then
Yeah,
yes.
why don't we do that?
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll pull item 1 from consent. Warrants or the financial statement?
The warrants.
Okay, so we'll pull item 1 from consent. Would anyone care to? Is there any member of the public who wants to pull anything from consent? Hearing none, would anyone like to make a motion to approve item 2 on the consent calendar?
Also,
Moved by Dave. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Scott. No further dialogue. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed.
Motion approved.
Motion approved. Okay, next item, back to item 1, would be the payment of general fund warrants. Blake.
And so again, Crystal, probably not questions for you. They're kind of technical purchases that I'm just looking for explanations perhaps from staff. There was a $18,000 purchase from Environmental Water Solutions on a cooling coil retrofit part for Tut Hill BNR blowers. Just curious what that purchase was.
So the blowers that we use for aeration use water cooling to cool oil. So we retrofitted some units that didn't have that. It adds longevity to the unit, makes them run longer, cooler.
Okay.
So that's what that was. It was to do three units.
So these are kind of upgrades to the existing blowers?
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. Second one was under Flight Light Inc., a $4,700 purchase of a lighted windsock for BNR influent pump. I thought I had seen this on a previous warrant that we had a large expense for a windsock, and so I'm just curious about a second one.
The first one was done at the chlorine building.
Okay.
The second one is at the tail end of the plant. So
Okay.
we identified 2 locations do lit
Okay.
windsocks, so that if we had an issue during hours of darkness,
Okay.
staff would be able to see what direction the wind was
Okay.
blowing.
This was out of the OSHA.
The one at chlorine was directly out of OSHA. This one was just something we decided to enhance it one
Good
step
for you
further.
guys. Good move. Thank you. I just curious, and then I thought I had a third one. Nope, that appears to be it. That's all.
Okay. With that, would anyone care to make a motion to approve the payment of the general fund warrants?
Also move.
Moved by Blake. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Dave. Those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed.
Motion approved.
Motion approved. Okay, next item is approval of the minutes of the regular board meeting on October 19th, 2022. Any questions or comments from the board on the minutes? Seeing none. Any public comment on the minutes? Hearing none, would anyone care to make a motion?
I so move.
Moved by Scott to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Dave. There's no further discussion. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed.
Motion approved.
Motion approved. Okay, we've already covered the presentation on the regional training facility. So next on the agenda is discussion and status update of the sewer charge and connection fee rate studies. Richard, I'll hand that over to you.
Crystal's going to give a PowerPoint presentation and have that discussion.
Great.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody. So as you guys know, we hired HDR to do our connection fee setting, rate study back in April of 2022. And we've been passing information back and forth and having conversations back and forth with them over the past several months. We put this item on the agenda at the request of the Finance Committee to just kind of give you guys a brief discussion of the status and a potential calendar, recommended calendar for the rest of the tasks that we need to do to finalize the rate study, potential Prop 218, and so on and so forth. So, Rochelle, can you do the next slide, please? So I'm just going to briefly cover status, a little bit of a history of the rate studies for TTSA, or the rate increases and decreases for TTSA, some of our high-level projects in the next 5 years. And then the calendar's on 2 pages, so bear with me on that. And then any discussion or follow-up items you guys would like for me to do. Well, first thing I want to say is I want to be clear, this is not the actual rate study. HDR will be preparing that, presenting that to you guys, and you'll see when on the calendar with their presentation and the actual rate study. You'll get the materials for that before that board meeting in enough time to be able to read it and get your hands around it. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the sewer connection fee study first, and I'm going to look on my paper because I can't see that. So for the sewer connection fee study right now, that one is a little bit behind the progress of the sewer service charge study. They've developed it and it's in draft form. They have presented it to Richard and I. They currently right now they're waiting on some items from us. Right now Richard's researching vehicles and equipment needs for the next 25 years because we did not have that in our 25-year forecast that we put together and had given to HDR. We're doing, and just some background, the department managers, we have gone together several times, as well as with Richard, to review all of our projects from the master sewer plan, the IT SCADA master plan, operating and maintenance overhead type numbers. And we went through every single project, determined if anything can be pushed out, if anything was moving up. We also took into consideration the hyper culture, or the culture we have right now with the inflated costs on things, and worked with the HDR on this as well. So the management team has really dug into the details of our 25-year forecast. So we are going to be revisiting that one more time with the updated information from the vehicles and equipment. And we also have on the table discussion of the disinfection project that's later on in the 25-year forecast. The other thing that we need to be doing, which is what Celeste and I will be doing, is we will be working through...
So, Crystal?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but on in terms of the disinfection project, we're talking about switching from chlorine to UV, because that's currently in the far out phases of our master plan. It's a high dollar item. Are we contemplating kind of doing an option A, option B rate study that would look at advancing that into the current?
Yes, exactly. And we don't want to say UV, we want to say disinfection. We're looking at, so to give you a little bit of background, the managers met with supervisors and some of that staff that's going to probably be succession staff, and really had a conversation with them looking at the projects of what do we think is realistic as far as what we can push out, what might need to move forward. And that's the one item that everyone kind of keeps saying probably should be drugged back this direction. Mm-hmm. So we had that discussion. We started discussing moving a study up earlier into the first phase so that we could start looking into what sampling do we need to do over the next year or two to start identifying what processes may be available to us, and then move that dollar amount in. So, yeah, we're looking at A and B, and we want to plug them in and see how that affects everything if we move them up.
And then I think the big deal with that is that project presumably would get us away from liquid chlorine, which is our highest that's our most hazardous thing we got going here, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Richard. And so then the next thing that we will be working on, myself and Celeste, and then bringing Richard into the loop before we come to the Finance Committee and the board, is we need to sync up the appendices in the current Blue Book rules and regs, because when we did the connection fee study a couple years ago, that appendix is no longer valid. That's in this book, but it also, they're not in sync. So the sewer service charges and the connection fee charges are not in sync. And so we will be working on that with Sean Korn at HDR. And we've already started, and we're going to also be drafting a new rules and regs ordinance that will be all part of the package deal. You'll see that when we go to the calendar. Tentative, the presentation, the first presentation of the sewer connection fee study is going to go to the Finance Committee on January 11th, with a tentative date of coming to the Board of Directors on February 15th, and a tentative potential public hearing on April 19th. And I'll show you some alternatives when we look at the calendar. Over to the sewer service charge study, status update, basically all the same information. The only difference is that the sewer service study and presentation has been presented to the Finance Committee, draft one from HDR, from Sean Korn and his team. So the Finance Committee has already seen one round of that presentation. Any questions on this before we go to the next slide? Okay, I wanted to give a little bit, I want to give a little bit of a history of the sewer service charges and connection fee rate increases that we have done here at TSA. So the last Prop 218 we did was in 2006, ordinance number 1/2006. We approved 5 years of rate increases. We increased the rates the first 4 years, and then the 5th year, which would have been fiscal year 2010 and 11. Ordinance 1/2010, we reduced rates in that ordinance. Then the next ordinance is 2/2015, and that's when we adopted the Blue Book, the rules and regs. And then ordinance 1/19, this is where we did a connection fee study by HDR Sean Korn. We had some rate changes there, and we also had codes changed in that with that ordinance. And then that's just a note that in the rules and regulations for connection fee and sewer service charges, those appendices are not in sync with each other. Questions?
Crystal, on
Yes.
the ordinance 1/2010, the reduction, was that reduced back to 2006?
It wasn't a specific one of those rates of those rate increases, but what it was reduced to is between, I believe, 2007 and 8.
Okay.
The rates of 2007 and 8. So the last official increase was in fiscal year 10, and the reduction was in fiscal year 11. Any other questions? Okay, next slide. Thank you, Rashad. So I wanted to summarize high level. These are forecasted estimates that we put together internally I summarized the information from the table that the chart that the managers and Richard and I worked on. Two distinguishments here. First of all, the left side is Fund 2. That's our restricted funds. The major revenue source there is the connection fee revenue, and that is restricted to capacity expenses. Fund 6 is our rehab, replacement, and upgrade fund. That's unrestricted funds, and those are funded by primarily sewer service charges and then ad valorem tax revenue. When we got together and we started doing some detailed analysis of the projects, we had come up with percentages, and these are high level. I'm going to preface that with saying that projects will be determined on a case-by-case basis when they're actually being implemented, and we go out for bids and we start working on the projects with internally and also with legal on what we can actually pay out of the restricted funds for those projects. But what we did was we took our max capacity of 9.6 MGD per the, what is this, HWDR?
Yeah.
The WDR document of the 9.6 million gallons per day. And then we took the current EDUs that we have as of August, because we did this back in August, which was 42,198 EDUs. We multiplied that by 200, because it's 200 per EDU. And when you take that total and divide it by the 9.6, we get 88%. So we're at 88% capacity, high level. So what we did on the projects where we could not determine the exact available capacity we had, because some of those we could with Jay's information, we took a 12% of the projects we felt like would qualify for restricted monies. And we did that down the whole 25-year forecast. That information has been also shared with Sean, and there's a lot of going back and forth with the managers and Sean. That being said, I took the high-level projects that we're going to come into the next 5 years according to the schedule that we currently have. And for Fund 2, we're looking at $2.9 million of the digestion improvement project for restricted funds, $2.1 million in equipment for the equipment vehicle warehouse. I put the SCADA IT plan on there just because the majority of that will show up on the Fund 6 side, but I wanted the whole project in there. So we're looking at $631,000 that can potentially be used from the restricted funds. And overall, because I didn't put every project on there for the first 5 years, we're looking at about $8.7 million in the first 5 years out of Fund 2. Fund 6, the rest of the digestion improvement project, $20.9 million. The river crossing gravity main between manhole 33 and manhole 35, $2.2 million. Phosphorus removal and recarb rehab, $3.1 million. The primary and secondary treatment rehab, $8.9 million. Building roof replacements, the first $2.5 million of that total of $12.6 million project is in the first 5 years, meaning fiscal year 24 to 27. And then the SCADA IT, $2.6 million. Total Fund 6 projects in the next 5 years from 24 to 27, $49.3 million. Between both funds, we have $58 million between FY24 and 27. This does not include O&M. Any questions?
So just to clarify, it sounds like, I know that when we looked at our reserves and compared them to the reserve policy, we have pretty good reserves in Fund 2 and limited reserves in Fund 6. And so you took some of the projects that HDR identified as kind of Fund 6 repair replacement projects, but actually said there's a portion of those costs that can be funded through the expansion Fund 2, and you guys did a little reallocation of that so that we're utilizing the reserves that we have more effectively and allocating funds appropriately between the two.
And these numbers that you're looking at do include the hyperinflation and also just normal inflation within the first 5 years. And so we're in a unique, however long it's going to be, maybe 1 to 2 years, hopefully, only of where we have just really hyperinflation. I mean, I went to the grocery store the other day and I about died. So, the next slide, Michelle, if there are not any other questions on this one. So here's the tentative calendar. We've already had the November 9th presentation of the sewer service charges to the finance. No, the calendar was presented, I'm sorry, on November 9th. The draft calendar, the December 14th Finance Committee meeting is canceled.
Sorry, I lost my notes.
I don't have it memorized yet. Nor did I print it out, sorry. So then on January 11th Finance Committee, we are going to be, HDR will be presenting the draft rate fee and connection fee presentation to the Finance Committee with any Q&A and feedback from them. will return on February 8th, Finance Committee for the final version and draft, with the goal of submitting that to the board packet on February 9th, do it noon, for the February 15th board meeting. In the February 15th board meeting, the goal is to present the sewer rate and connection fee studies, both the presentation, the acceptance of the study, and the setting of the public hearing and publish notice of meeting for the connection fees. We have to give 45 days for Prop 218 between the time that you guys accept the study and the time we have the public hearing. We did discuss various ways of communication. We had to completely formalize that within the Finance Committee, and I've got some research to do on my end from what other areas, what other member districts and other agencies have done. I know that the guidance from a while back was we wanted to really make sure we had some great communication with the public on the rate fees and the potential rate increases. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Given that agenda, if we meet that, we don't have to come back to the board a second time. We need to mail out customer notifications no later than March 1st to meet the 45-day deadline of the notice of public hearing. March, I put in some additional options of meetings if we need to come back. If we need to go back to the Finance Committee, we can do that on March 8th, with the board meeting being March 15th, and that would push the public hearing out to May 17th, and that's our drop dead. Maybe that's a bad choice of words, but that's to get the potential rate fee increase into the FY24 year. The last option to have the public hearing is May 17th, because we need to have a 30-day protest period, which I'm putting some more questions together to work with Richard on for legal, but there is a 30-day protest period after the public hearing. No?
I don't think so. There may be a 30, if you have to use an ordinance to increase your rates, then I think you do, there's a 30-day, it's a waiting period. So, waiting period until the ordinance takes effect. So, but I wouldn't characterize it as a protest period.
Okay, and so and we will have an ordinance. So we'll have the rules and regs ordinance.
Yeah.
So that's the potential recommended calendar.
Okay, thanks.
And that's it. Any questions?
Let's bring it back to the board. Questions or comments? I've got a couple, but I want to defer to the other board members first.
Can you go back a slide, please? Thank you.
So, just clarifying, so the board as a whole is going to see HDR's study in February. We're looking to hopefully accept that study, which has recommended adjustments to our connection and user fee or service charges to our customers. We accept the study and then set a public hearing for 2 board meetings later, March, April, to actually adopt the recommended rates for a 5-year period associated with the service charges. And then we need to, when we're doing that 5-year plan, send notification to all of our customers. So there's a mailing that needs to go out by March 1. And then if we receive by that public hearing date more than 50% protest votes, we can't move forward with it, but anything less than that, we can. And then in that April board meeting, we take action to adopt the rates, and then there's a waiting period, and they become effective of July 1, right? Okay.
So just a comment I've got on this. I think it's it's good to have a schedule. I think being able to meet this schedule is going to depend on what some of that HDR information says. So if, from my perspective, if they're coming out and saying, gee, we need to double rates, I don't see us meeting the schedule, because that's something I'm going to want to, I think we as a board are going to need to take a closer look at and really think about, is that what we're doing? I think if it comes back and says, gee, over a 5-year time period, rates are going to be increasing, 5% a year or something on that order, that's a different conversation, different public communication process. So I just want to put that out, that at least from my perspective, I would not be comfortable kind of just pushing this through to hit the next billing, the next rate billing cycle if there's major changes that are being recommended, because that may require more public communication, it may require more board discussion, et cetera. So and maybe that's just me. I just want to put that on the table, because I don't know where this is headed. By the time we get through the math.
Yeah, and we've got, based on the master plan and the condition of the plant, we are on a pretty tight timeline. And so I'm trying to think creatively how we can, and I think to answer your question, we're not looking at 5% per year. It's looking like a doubling or more over the 5-year time frame. And so how we can have that good discussion and not hold up the process for potentially another calendar year, which starts to put us I think the agency in a bad spot in terms of meeting its goals is something we should talk about. Whether or not that means the January board meeting, there's a draft presentation. It's not for acceptance, but I think they're far enough along that we could talk substantially about the rate changes and possibly come up with, if we need to, tweaks or plans so that we can still adopt in February. But we may need to consider that.
Crystal, you put together a spreadsheet that basically you can adjust, right? You've shared that with us prior.
Yes.
And to your point, I couldn't agree more. I mean, to achieve what we need to achieve, I feel like we really kind of have to step in it. I mean,
yeah.
I think one of the, I don't know if it's a benefit, but the rate being relatively low right now, if you're going to do that, going up more is going to be less noticeable, so to speak, and less of a hurt. Would you agree? I don't know, Crystal.
Yeah, and I would add, I can add that, I didn't hear the last part of what you said, but going back to what you said, like, I can add that to the January as part of the schedule, a draft to the January board meeting, January, whatever it was. And then what was the second part of what you said?
Oh, I was just saying, given the fact that the rate is relatively low, since it hasn't really been raised in 10 plus years, 14 years, I think a larger increase, one certainly can be justified, but I think it'll be maybe less painful than we would think, because and looking at the plan, we've got to figure out the funding.
But I think it probably is a good idea to get the numbers in front of the full board on a discussion item rather than expecting the board, but certainly those that are on the finance committee meeting to absorb, accept, and move forward with those specific numbers. It would be good to get them. The numbers are, you can play with numbers. We see the capital projects. We can decide to push things out, and
Right.
that'll reduce things. There's debt financing. We can make assumptions about
Right.
grant funding, but it's good to get those in front of us, and for the rest of the board to see that. And I think we're far enough along that we could have that discussion in January, so that hopefully we can still take action in February with making whatever. Have a month to digest it and maybe give staff direction.
Yeah, I think maybe as much as anything, the finance committee does a lot of good work, but this is a full board issue, and just kind of baking the cake at the finance committee level and kind of laying it on us in February to say, okay, we're doubling the rates now. That's not going to work for me.
Right.
So I just want to put that out there.
We can definitely do that, and we do have that buffer. So even if we did the January and the February, you guys still weren't ready, and we wanted to make some more changes, we still have the buffer going back in March to the full board. That would give three opportunities before you accept it and we set the public hearing.
Right.
So, I will definitely add that to the agenda. Or to the
Yes, and sometimes these things get high levels of interest by the general public, and sometimes they don't, and that can affect what's an appropriate timeline for something like this. I've been through these that have gotten very high levels of attention from the general public, and trying to rush it through ends up being contrary to your goal of the agency's broader goals. And sometimes if it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind, then it's not a huge dollar impact, even though it's a high percentage impact, it's not that big of a deal. So I think we need to, at least from my perspective, as it relates to the public communication piece of it, just be mindful that if this becomes controversial, we just rushing it through is not necessarily going to be the right way to go about it. If it's not, then it's maybe no big deal. So, and we'll just see how it plays out.
So it seems like a calendar change or adding it to January's, I can't think of anything else, special board meetings. I think January is probably still a good time frame to do that. You comfortable with that, Dan? Or
The sooner the better.
I don't think we were planning on having a December meeting.
Right.
And so that would be, I don't know, when is our January board meeting?
January 15th, or that's the finance meeting. 18th. January 18th, 15th.
Yeah, and if we do have the buffer to even go 2 months before actually setting the public hearing, not April but May, I think that's a good timeline.
Yeah, we should have.
Yeah. And I would say, having seen the numbers, if you talk in percentages, it sounds much more alarming than the actual dollars, like you said. I mean, you're talking about a cup of coffee around here per month in dollars, but in percentages, it sounds like people are all going to have to refinance their homes or something like that. But it's only really a cup of coffee a month. But we should look at that and give it.
So I think making sure the information is presented both from a dollar standpoint and a percentage standpoint is a good thing. Yeah, we'll see where it goes. So it sounds like you guys have seen a sneak preview of some of this already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. This probably means that
Dan's upset. Something happened in Florida.
we lost it.
Tornado.
And I don't think we're getting too far ahead of ourselves to just say, that there's a debt financing component of this, as well as it's not. And so there's
there's levers in there.
Amount to digest, and so I think it is great to get this on the January agenda.
Okay. Let's make sure we've got our interested members of the public on the phone here.
Gail. We lost you. I'm just getting you back online.
Yeah, thank you, honey.
You're welcome.
Okay, is there any further, so I think this is a presentation item, no action.
For the January meeting.
What's that?
Oh, this one, yes.
Yeah, for this agenda, this was to give us an update on the rate study and the schedule. So the rate study is underway. The Finance Committee has seen some of the preliminary results of that. And we would be agendizing for our January board meeting a detailed presentation for the full board that basically mimics the information that the Finance Committee or that staff has available that would have kind of give us a clear indication of where the recommendations are heading on the rates, and then we would move forward from there.
Yeah, and I'll reach out to Sean and to make sure his team is available for that day.
Okay.
And if there's a problem, I'll circle back with Richard and let him know.
Okay. Is there any other board discussion on this? Any public comment?
None from me.
You good? Okay. Okay. So we've had discussion, we've had a status update. If there's no further comments, let's move on down to our next agenda item, which is approval of consultant services to develop the SCADA standards. Paul.
Good morning, President Wilkins and board. All right, so just a brief background. Back in August of 2021, the Board of Directors awarded to Jacobs Engineering a contract to provide the agency with an IT SCADA master plan. The plan assessed the current condition of the agency's technology systems and components, comparing existing technology against industry standards, and provided implementation planning for identified improvements. Back on June 15th, 2022, the final IT SCADA master plan was presented and accepted by the Board of Directors. The plan recommended 3 major phases of implementation. Those 3 phases are broken down into 8 separate projects. The project before you today is to develop the SCADA standards. That's part of one of 3 projects in phase 1. In August of 2022, staff requested a proposal from Jacobs Engineering for the development of the SCADA standards as outlined in phase 1 of the IT SCADA master plan. The scope of that service is to establish a design guide for supervisory control and SCADA acquisition system equipment, or SCADA equipment, SCADA system programming, SCADA information technology interfaces, and SCADA information technology interfaces. Due to the significant amount of data and information gathered to assess TTSA's technology infrastructure during the preparation of the IT SCADA master plan, Jacobs was recognized as uniquely qualified to provide these consultation services. As a professional service and in accordance with the agency's purchasing ordinance, only one proposal was solicited with the intent of a sole source award to Jacobs Engineering. Jacobs provided a proposal for the consultation services in the amount of $224,921. Excuse me. The fiscal impact is that the project total is less than the approved budget amount of $241,000. Management and staff recommend approval of task order number 38, which is included in the board packet, of the master services agreement with CH2M Hill, which is also Jacobs, as you may be aware, to develop the TTSA SCADA standards. And we're seeking your approval.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board?
I'd just say, this is highly technical stuff. Understanding the exact details of it, I think, is probably above any of our levels of understanding. So there's a level of obvious trust. When I see the magnitude of the cost, I know that there's a lot of process control stuff in this to run this plan. is the what I see as a pretty substantial price tag for just phase one. Are we? I know that we had something called the Plant Information Systems, or PIS, before. Are we pretty much rehauling all of that and coming up to a whole new standard? We're not just minorly. It doesn't sound like this is a price tag to just sort of tweak a little bit. It sounds like we're really going to do an overhaul on our sort of plant SCADA system. Is that accurate?
So, two separate systems. The plant information system was an old computerized maintenance management system, which has since been deprecated in favor of Lucity.
Okay, that's Lucity.
So Lucity is now taking place of that. This is actually for the SCADA systems. So everything throughout the plant is run by the supervisory control and data acquisition system, or PLCs that are used throughout the plant. Every button that we push throughout the plant that monitors and controls the plant, so that we monitor quality, what's going out of the plant, what's coming into the plant at all times, is controlled by numerous PLCs. Those PLCs have to be programmed, and this is phase one to build those foundational data standards. Like when we control a pump, for instance, this would have a standard control object that says this is how we control that pump. It also would define the types and the manufacturers of all the PLCs throughout the plant, so that we have standardized equipment everywhere, so that we have knowledge sharing through our staff. They know how to work on that brand, that make, that model of PLC. We also get to leverage the ability to have less spare parts and things. Of 5 different manufacturers, 5 different models, we can consolidate that and have less inventory on hand. So this is just one step in that process.
Trying to think of a follow-up question. With this type of technology, how disruptive is this area? You come up with a master plan and invest this amount in there, and is there a strong likelihood that 2-3 years from now, everybody's going to a whole different, system of, PLCs are out and Bluetooth, whatever, or the new technology is
So that's a difficult question to answer, but I'll say that the SCADA master plan, IT SCADA master plan, it's an attempt to say this is where we're at and this is what the modern technologies are doing right now. We may not be bleeding edge, we may not even be cutting edge, but we want to stay modern. We want to stay up with the current technologies. And we do, part of the IT SCADA master plan did identify that we've got some older infrastructure that's here and is due for replacement. So as part of that, we want to make sure that we're staying with those standards and being smart about our purchases, because we have limited dollars and we want to be responsible with those funds and our staff's time.
So I have a question, Paul. So this is a just shy of $30,000 contract. Is it likely that there would be subsequent contracts with Jacobs / CH2M Hill for future implementation that would be even larger than this? That by virtue of doing this contract, we're likely tying ourselves to future high-dollar contracts as well?
That is a possibility. It depends on which project is in there, but it wasn't assessed as part of this project, but it is a possibility. There's also the possibility we could go out to outside vendors that would be outside of their scope, because there's other technical resources we're probably going to need as when we go to implementation phase, when we actually start cutting some of these things in.
Right.
So that's outside of what their scope would be. Now there is the possibility we may seek their services for project management or something like that, but we would have to assess those on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So at a high level, what is included in phase 2 and 3, and what are their relative estimated kind of budgetary costs?
So phase 1 was setting the foundation. Phase 2 is to replace the SCADA system. And I mean, there's only one project in that, and it's really just replacing it. And now that is spread out over a number of years due to the high cost and the disruption to plant and operations. Phase 3 is actually to optimize the asset management. And there's 4 separate projects within that. So it's quite a long process to go through this. The dollar figure that was in the master plan, if you give me a moment, I can bring that up. The total dollar figure identified in the original IT SCADA master plan was $4.7 million.
Okay.
So that's spread out all the way to 2029 at this time. Whether or not that moves is obviously, probably part of rate studies and different things that are going on at the time. But we did include it in the budget, and it has been included in the master plan.
And so this $200,000 project is actually a fairly, the major one's probably that phase 2, the actual acquisition of the hardware and installation in the system with it.
Yeah, just to add, to follow up on the question of, are we kind of locking in with Jacobs as we go? We kind of were in this at this phase, but as we go further into the process of actually replacing equipment, that's when now you're talking integrators and some in-house work with our staff. And so as we kind of go out from here, it's going to open that door to other potential vendors that can provide services. It's just at this point, we're actually talking about, to kind of say, this is how we're going to write the code that goes in that computer. And it's a standardized thing so that when we hand that to Jay for the next project, the integrator that comes on board knows exactly what he needs to do, or we can then hand it to Joe Integrator because we want to do 3 PLCs and we're going to contract that out. So as we kind of go out, it opens, the doors are going to open.
Okay. Other questions or comments from the board?
Did we ever have any kind of master plan in place before this, or was it sort of seat of the pants? Every project was sort of unique and got integrated by somebody, but was really a combination of.
Yeah, to my knowledge, this master plan that was developed was the first SCADA IT master plan. I think prior to that, it was homegrown or part of projects like DNR, dewatering. They got lumped into that project. I still think a lot of in-house input, so where it was somewhat of a homegrown system.
Right. Okay, other questions or comments? Any public comment on this item?
Just one comment. There was a mention that this was going to go to 2029. The full financial impact of this.
The current IT SCADA master plan spreads those costs out and the different projects all the way out through 2029 currently.
Were you able to hear that, Dale?
Yes.
Okay. Any additional public comment? Okay, hearing none. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I'll move.
Moved by Blake to approve the consultant services contract with Jacobs for the development of the SCADA standards. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Smeltzer. There's no further discussion. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed? Great. Next item is a request for an increase in the project contingency for the 2021 chlorine scrubber improvement project.
I'm going to have Jay take the lead, and I'll provide support as we go.
Good.
So good afternoon, directors, President Wilkins, Vice President Trisson, other directors. As you're aware, we're underway on a scrubber replacement project. The original deadline for the project was to be done in August. We authorized this project about a year ago. With supply chain shortages, labor shortages, material hang-ups, et cetera, the contractor was not able to meet his deadline on account of the new scrubber not being yet constructed and available. Currently, the chip shortage is one of the big problems in getting the PLCs constructed. So currently, their forecasted delivery date is January of 2023. As we all know, January and this environment is very difficult: snow and ice, difficult ambient temperatures. And this is a project in which we will be relying on a temporary scrubber to provide safeguards for our existing facility while the new scrubber is inserted into the spot where the existing scrubber is going to be demolished out of. So to back up, explain that more clearly, we have a temporary scrubber arriving on site. It needs to be connected and commissioned so that they may decommission the existing scrubber, demolish it, remove it from the building, and put in the new scrubber. To do that work, the temporary scrubber needs to be set outside. In fact, if you've driven by the building recently, you've seen when you came into the plant or when you leave today, if you look next to the building, there's a mysterious box underneath a bunch of tarps. That's the temporary scrubber. So in light of the fact that they had a delay and their scrubber is going to be arriving in the middle of winter, we huddled as a team and assessed whether we should be entertaining doing this work in the winter. And the risks that are involved are ambient related. If you have a heavy snowfall, or if you have rime ice built up on certain pieces of equipment, or things aren't weatherproofed as they should be, then you could potentially run into a scenario in which you have a chlorine leak and your temporary scrubber is not able to activate. It may have been tested, may have been wired correctly and all that stuff, but if there's some environmental factor that prevents that scrubber from running, we have a fairly significant problem on our hands, to say it very understatedly. If we have a chlorine leak that escapes the building and we don't have a temporary scrubber to help us, we're in a difficult spot. So we've asked KG Walters, our contractor, for a cost to what it would mean if we postponed the construction work until June, much more favorable time of year. We don't have the numbers yet from KG Walters. That's part of the complication here. We have some numbers from them, but we don't have the whole picture. And they're waiting on their suppliers to provide the missing pieces in order for them to give us a number. Our current estimates are that we're probably in the neighborhood of up to maybe $150K to delay the project until June. The current contingency right now is $110,000. That was authorized by the board at a year ago, at November 17, 2021, regularly scheduled meeting. To date, we've had authorized change orders of $19,000, and we have potential change orders out there of $23,000 additional that have not yet been approved or executed. So if you total those, we have a total of $42,000 in change orders, potential change orders, if everything that was out there was approved. We'd end up currently at 42, which leaves us only $67K of buffer left for additional change orders. In addition to that, we know that what was discovered over the last month is we know that there are going to be some additional change orders with respect to some of the electrical design work. And so and some of the PSM requirements, RMP requirements that didn't get folded into the contract. So the sum total could be more than 150 by the time we're done with this. The difficult part of this is, and why we have it before the board today, instead of waiting until we have cost, is that if we do not have a December board meeting, then our next board meeting is January 18, And at that point, the contractor may have already gotten that ball rolling in terms of doing the field work. And we may be at a point of no return at that point. So we thought it was important to get in front of the board today for some direction, for some discussion and direction. And then so that we can be prepared once we do have some numbers back as to what direction we may want to take.
Thanks, Jay. I've got a couple of questions on this, but questions from other board members? Comments?
I mean, the delay in, you'd set a completion date in August, and they didn't meet that because of lack of parts. Is that kind of in the contract of force majeure, or something that they didn't have control over and have no responsibility over not meeting that? And the fact that we're now asking for something else, I'm wondering whether there's not an argument to be made for a no-cost delay instead of, I'm not sure, are they paying rental on this this interim scrubber device that now is going to sit for an extra 6 months?
Yeah.
If we delay that they weren't counting on?
Correct. So the costs so far are things like additional scrubber rental, which ends up being a fairly significant portion of that. That may be on the order of like $60K extra, for rental costs. Storage of the new unit when it arrives, and we can't yet take delivery of it. We're just going to store it for when. Increase costs for labor because of increasing labor rates. Various factors that might be out of their control on a delay. I can't think of what those might be, but there's various costs that they have in their billing into this delay estimate.
So I think Blake's question is the same I was going to ask. Is I don't recall the details of the contract on this. It sounds like we put the project out to bid. There was a completion time frame built into the bid. We entered into an agreement with the contractor to get the project completed. Contractor wasn't able to secure some of the materials that they needed to complete the project. And it's really a question of, is the contract structured in a way that makes that our problem, or is that the contractor's problem?
So the way the contract is set up is that there are liquidated damages if they don't meet this deadline.
Right.
The issue is that when this came up first, they were predicting that we would get the scrubber sooner in the fall, like right about now.
Mm-hmm.
So we wrote a change order that allowed them, basically waived the LDs, allowing them to extend to a point in which they received delivery of the scrubber.
So we waived LDs, but we didn't agree to take on additional expenses.
No, we didn't agree to take on additional expenses. It was basically we will, not assess LDs due to a delay in your delivery of the scrubber.
Right.
But what it means under the current conditions is that when the scrubber arrives, that's when they install, and so that would be that January timeframe. So if we were to say we're not willing to incur any extra costs, that is what. So they approached us a few months ago and asked and said, would you be willing to entertain paying, we all think it's kind of a silly idea to build in the winter. Would you entertain us, paying for a delay up until June? At that point, we had said, no, the contract is a contract. We are not interested in paying for that service. That was basically at a point where we were trying to apply pressure to get them to deliver the scrubber in November instead of in January. So they've already given us signals that they're not interested in giving us absorbing those costs. And so I think what would happen if we were to say, no, we're not gonna pay any extra. They were gonna try to install this in January. That's kind of where things are headed.
Right. And then if there was a problem with the plant operation that tied back to the temporary equipment they were installing, and if some kind of an event happened, then there'd be another argument as to, I mean, do we think our contract's pretty clear that ends up being the contractor's responsibility and liability? Or is that another argument as to who bears responsibility for that?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to get into those discussions at this time. But,
yeah, I've not looked at the contract in regard to that question, Dan, but I think there'd probably be joint liability. I mean, the agency would be principally responsible because you got to operate the plant and protect public health and safety. And you may have indemnity rights against the contractor, but
right.
I think what's important on this one, Jay, is you got to do the work at the right time. And if the owner needs to initiate a change order because January is not the right time to do the work, then you initiate a change order, and there's going to be a cost of that to make sure it's done at the most safe time.
Yeah. Now, I've been involved in these situations before, and it's a question of who, there's risk involved with construction projects. There's risk involved with contractors, and it's how do we want to? I guess I think we probably have an argument to say, look, you had a requirement to get this done in August. We gave you flexibility to not charge you money because you didn't get it done in August. Now we're at a decision. I guess the question is, if we said, you know what, we're not paying any more money, is the contractor actually going to try to do the install in January, or are they just going to eat the cost and wait till April or something?
Yeah, no, I think that the way the indications are per the earlier discussions earlier this fall is that they would try to do it in January. That's how we've been gearing up for that. Having meetings, they're getting everybody set for it.
So now it's a question of, do we want to direct them to not do the install in January and pay extra money because we're directing them not to do that?
Yeah.
Or do we want to let them try it? And then just be like, hey guys,
absorb the risk.
Here's the risk to you guys of doing this.
Yeah, I don't want to discount.
What's that?
I don't want to discount two things. One is our joint liability here, but number two, more importantly, is that we're talking about a serious, significant risk to the community. It's not just.
And I probably don't understand what that is, what the function of the scrubber is, and how that.
Okay, so stop me if I'm giving any information that might be considered confidential. But we have a chlorine system that has a number of chlorine vessels in them, and that scrubber system is designed such that if one of those vessels released the contents, that scrubber neutralizes that chlorine and creates a safe.
So the scrubber is kind of a safeguard against a chlorine release.
Correct.
Okay.
So if this temporary scrubber were not to successfully operate, we could have a release to the environment of a significant amount of chlorine that could be large enough to shut down many things and cause evacuations through a lot of different areas.
Okay.
So I'm taking it to the general public level at that point.
Mm-hmm.
If you then bring it down to the scope of plant staff, the risk could be greater than that in terms of the safety of the personnel.
You're thinking the contractor may be willing to take that risk on, but we're not.
Yeah, because the likelihood
So we operate, as you know, 24/7, right? Contractors here only 8 hours a day. We have some joint liability if something were to happen in the middle of the night. It's contractor's not even here.
Okay. I understand a little better now.
The nature of this temporary scrubber that's going to be exposed to the elements, is it, I'm just trying to, I'm all for, there's a certain amount of risk aversion we should take, but I'm just trying to, it's not, if it was exposed water pipes, they're going to freeze, they're going to burst, but I don't know what the nature of this device is and how reliable, it is. We have the whole plant's running all winter long, and so, if it's complicated enough and you see multiple points of clear failure just because of cold temperatures or snow, I would think that they would protect that from potentially both of those things.
So
I'm just trying to weigh the reality of.
So we've asked for letters from the scrubber manufacturer certifying that it's available to designed to work in certain conditions, and there are safeguards that contractors could potentially implement. For the first part, it's kind of like it's worth the paper it's written on. If some kind of scrubber says it'll work under these conditions, but then we have some kind of I said 50-mile-an-hour winds and 60-mile-an-hour winds. Then maybe it's that certification isn't worth that much if we have significant lawsuits. A significant number of lawsuits on a release that causes fatalities or injuries. And then in terms of the contractor, the contract was designed for completion in August. So some of the things that you might have put in for winter months, it's not as robust as maybe you would have originally envisioned. For example, if it was designed to be done in the winter, we may have put the temporary scrubber in some kind of temporary building, instead of just being out in the open. And that all is extra cost as well. Temporary building is probably more expensive than a delay until June.
The temporary building should be borne potentially by unless they said they didn't need it and we said they did, that should be borne by the contractor.
It should, but they think they would have an argument that was never envisioned in their original bid, and that this delay in materials was beyond their ability to forecast that. So is it fair for them to absorb the cost of the building when it was never envisioned to be done in this time, that kind of thing. So it's the only thing you want to add, Richard, on this?
Yeah, it really all comes down to the risk and likelihood of an event. It's a very fitting the new scrubber into the existing spot is a very tight fit. It's a pretty complicated. Well, it seems simple. It's a very complicated project. I think that the backup scrubber needs to be 100% reliable 100% of the time. And I think in talking amongst us, we can't guarantee that. That's really what it boils down to. Yes, we've asked for the paperwork from the manufacturer to say, yeah, you're all good. It all goes down to the what if. As Jay mentioned, there's some other things that have popped up as we've gotten closer to starting the project that we're going to have to iron out that further complicate some of this project a little bit as far as powering the units and testing. There's just no leeway for any misstep on this project, and it seems like we're getting a pretty good early winter, and if everything continues, trying to do the work is going to probably be under snow, adverse conditions. Will the scrubber run 100% when it's 2 degrees outside, that we don't know.
What is the time frame once they get delivery of the unit? How much more work do they have? They have 2 months, 3 months, 2 weeks?
Well, that's now being complicated by some of the electrical change order stuff, but probably about a month at this point.
More than you can just see in a window of opportunity on the weather forecast to you know, speed that up.
What are we talking about? Total money here, $40,000?
Sounds like maybe 150-ish potentially.
Yeah, 150-ish. We don't have the numbers, the official numbers from the contractors.
Based on this delay in time, it's all that 150?
That's what we're estimating at this point.
So while the probability of an accident is probably still low, it's not, you guys have concerns, and the consequence obviously are super extreme if something happens, which, you know, it's hard to, it'd be hard to, I don't know, as much as I think we got to go with the delay. My feeling is we probably have to go with the delay given those concerns. I can't put the staff here at risk, but boy, it seems like the contractor should bear some, hopefully work with us on minimizing those change order costs, given that we dropped all those liquidated damages and have been working with them in good faith on their part and their inability to meet the timelines. So I would just really hammer on them. Giving you guys the numbers obviously sounds tough, and I guess that's what the bottom line, that's what you're looking for if we elect to increase it at all.
Yeah, ideally we would have come to you with the number due to the timing.
Right, and I, Richard had sent us an email advising of this. I had asked him to go ahead and put it on the agenda so we could have some initial discussion, get a flavor for where we were at with it, and then decide whether we wanted to just take this as an update, recognizing we may then need to schedule a special board meeting, or whether we wanted to give staff an indication as to how to proceed, and then potentially just do some cleanup at the January board meeting. I would defer to staff in terms of the there's obviously enough concern on the risk side that you brought this to us. There's this question I think that we all have as to who owns this, right? The cost. I can appreciate that when the contractor bid the job, they were probably working under an assumption that the materials would be available to them, and they weren't. So if you want to play hard nosed, you say tough luck, you bid it, that's your responsibility. More of a kind of partnering approach is, okay, there was some costs there, but like Blake said, I would expect that on the return side. The other thing I'm curious about is, do we really need to wait until June? You can always get snow into April and May and June, but generally the weather is getting more favorable. I mean, January, February is the heart of winter. March can be a big month. April can be snow-wise, but usually temperatures are better. You got more sunshine, etc. I don't know what the magic. I mean, June is ideal, but do we really need to wait that long?
Right. We did contemplate May.
What's that?
We did contemplate May.
Mm-hmm.
Just the getting away from any of the snowy months was an important concern. That scrubber being outside, being buried in snow. You have lots of things like control panels or just vent discharge with the treated exhaust. That's out. Things you don't want to obstruct.
Whose responsibility is it to operate the scrubber when it's? So is it the contractor's responsibility to put the temporary scrubber online for us to then operate, or do they put it online and they operate it temporarily while they're doing the replacement?
That one's tricky. The contractor is responsible for wiring it, starting it up, making sure it's functioning correctly.
You know, when they're here, the contract basically says they're responsible for, you know, temporary facilities and controls. The reality is that when a contractor isn't here, you know, for 16 hours of the day, our operators need to know how to use that for.
So that if something stops working properly,
yeah,
they're
so
able
we
to
don't-
deal with it.
Or respond to alarms, or
presumably call the contractor and say, hey,
Yeah.
your machine's not working properly, which would probably be the.
however, I'm a little bit bound by, we have some confidential information I'm not able to share.
Sure.
I could share maybe offline, but that time is of the essence. If it's not working, if the scrubber isn't
Sure.
working, we can't afford to wait for the contractor
Understood.
to get the right house in.
Right. Right. I guess depending on what it is, it's not working properly. But if it's, yeah.
We should remember this conversation when we start talking about switching over to a UV system.
Well, I think that's part of the reason why staff is trying to move that whole project
Right.
up in a shorter time frame. I think Dan's on to something in terms of saving some money, and that, I mean, if we set it April timeline, they're probably not going to be, you know, they got to demo the other thing. There's going to be a little bit of time. It'd probably be mid-April by the time they actually activate that. The days are longer. I think that might be a way to, you know, shorten the time, the cost without really taking on undue risk. I mean, those April storms aren't typically freezing cold ones. They might have some high snow load. You can see them usually coming in advance and do protective measures. So, I know you guys didn't give us a number. You've given us some rough numbers, but I'd like to move this forward and get you guys, you know, squared away with the contractor. And so, what is it that you think is a additional contingency for the project to move forward based on this delay?
Yeah, Jay and I had that discussion earlier. Assuming the estimate we put together for the delay based on that possibly longer time frame than what we'll go with, and then some other change orders that we were expecting with the electrical, I believe we settled on 200.
Yeah, because we said the electrical might be another $30K, and then, you know, some of the submittals that are, so this was an engineered project by Jacobs, H. Jones Nolan, and they missed some submittals that are required by our regulations that the contractor did not, you know, include costs for. So we were adding on another $50K to account for those other forthcoming potentials.
With the hope of not having
Is the
to come
200 the total contingency with the project, or an additional 200?
Additional 200.
On top of the 110.
Which does not mean, again, whenever we give you guys contingency, that's not like you go tell the contractor, guess what, you've got 200, or whatever that number is, we still are relying on you guys to manage that, but it gives you, you know, up to that amount without coming back to us. And so, if that's the safe number, I would entertain that number, but ask you guys to, I mean, maybe April 15th is the start date, and you can remind them about the liquidated damages and, you know, try and work that down below, as low down as you can, because it really does seem like the contractor bears some significant responsibility for these additional costs.
What we're used to seeing as a project start date, if you're willing to entertain this, is May 1. I mean, that's the contract, construction window.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to be, as a board member, I don't want to be put in the position of defining start dates. I think I got to rely on you guys to do what you're comfortable with. I just think, you know, that's something that should be, is a reasonable thing to consider.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think Blake, so what staff is suggesting, just so I'm clear, so the originally approved contingency amount was $110,000. I think what staff is suggesting is that an additional, if we want to direct the contractor to delay further activity on the project until next calendar year, date to be determined, that the additional contingency that would be maybe needed to accomplish that is an additional $200,000.
And some of those costs aren't just delay costs; those are just electrical items that have come up unexpected.
That's the middle. So, yeah, the net effect is the request is for 200, with the 150 being one for the delay, and the extra 50 being for the upcoming electrical change order.
So the original contingency was 110. There's been about $40,000 worth of that's either been executed or is in process, right? So there's about 70,000 remaining, 68,000 remaining on the originally approved contingency.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at is needing that 68 plus 200 more, so 268,000 total.
We could, these numbers are going fast because we didn't have time to prepare, but it could be that this 67 could be for the electrical and the submittals, and that we ask for the 150 for the delay.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question?
Yeah, let's open this up to public comment.
Thank you. It sounds like to me, and I might be missing something here, but it sounds like to me that the agency is bearing the full burden of a supply chain issue that has halted this project. Am I on the right track?
That's what I'm hearing. That's what's being suggested. Yes.
Now, given the fact that the supply chain issue is not totally the fault of the contractor and not totally the fault of the agency, shouldn't there be some consideration that we share this burden equally?
I think that argument could be made. I think what...
Except they're counter to it.
I think what we're hearing from Jay is that if we were to take that position, we say, hey, let's split the cost equally. The contractor may say, no, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the work, and then we would save the $150,000-ish on the change order, but absorb the risk of something bad happening. Well, not necessarily absorb the risk, but it creates a risk that something bad could happen, and then there's other issues to deal with at that point. I think that's the situation.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm hearing in the discussion, you guys, is that do not underestimate Mother Nature. Sitting back and thinking about the less severity of the storm at any certain point in time before the 1st of April, that's gambling, and I don't feel we ought to be in the position of gambling with the possibility of a major, or potential catastrophe in what we're dealing with here. $300,000 to postpone the project until April, and being assured that we can get the project done without any hiccups and without any catastrophes. Boy, I'll tell you, it's our mission as an agency is to perform our duties in operation to do our job without any major, mistakes or hiccups here. And I just hate for something very seriously to happen during the course of construction in the winter months, and have us have to go into some kind of a emergency salvage mode, so to speak. Yeah, I know 300 grand is a lot of money, but there's just so much that can happen with Mother Nature that could really mess things up for the agency, and I'm pretty nervous over this whole situation.
Yeah, and I think the number is 150-ish, Dale. I mean, that's staff's estimate, as opposed to 300. So, yeah. So anyway, I guess. So I think the question for the board is: do we want to authorize an additional $150,000 in contingency on this project for staff to have available to issue in additional change order capacity?
I'll move.
Okay.
I'll second.
We've got a motion by Blake to authorize an additional $150,000 in change order approval authority to staff. So that would be a total of $260,000.
Yes.
On the contract. And we had a second from Dave on that.
Yep.
Is there any further discussion on this item? Is there any further public comment on this item?
I'm nervous.
We should have just made you less nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what we're basically doing is agreeing to pay for the delay.
Yeah, well, this is something that we're likely to be facing more and more as we move up down the pike with plant improvements, but this should be a lesson for us.
Comment noted from the public. Sorry, no. Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion by the board members? Seeing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Okay.
Can we take a quick break?
Absolutely. So we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Okay, I'll just hold.
Thanks, Dale. Hey, sorry for being a smart aleck, Dale. I just can't resist.
No, that's okay. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
Get confirmation from them.
So I think
in January. We can't. They already said it was coming in November, so it actually wasn't going to be available until February or March. Since it's 7 days, actually shorter. You know, we should have just bought it together. That's why confirmation is taking delivery of the item.
I can walk it. I know some of the challenges.
They may not get it. They may not get it until May anyway.
Yeah.
You live in
Yeah, make sure you
there needs to be some.
We're kind of hoping they don't listen to the video. They don't know what.
And it's even more crazy.
Yeah, there's going to be a video posted.
Delay the post.
Yeah.
I don't think we're under any mandate to post the video, but what's that?
I think we are in retirement.
They've told you that it's going to come in January, but there's no guarantee that that's. They said it was going to come in November. So we shouldn't buy into a delay from January to that. We should only delay when they've actually taken possession of that item with some confirmation, the date of actual possession.
Like this, we're willing to pick up your hard costs, but don't be hitting us with, gee, my labor's going to cost a little more, or home office overhead, or any of that crap.
Wrestle them a bit.
What's that?
Arm wrestle them a bit.
Well, it's one thing it's one thing in my mind. It's like, okay, they've got hard costs for the temporary unit. They've got hard costs for storage, right? Okay, I've got an additional home office.
Nice.
And all these other soft costs. It's kind of bullshit.
And so far, we have not seen
Yeah, they're not going for that.
we haven't seen the final numbers.
Right. And then the prevailing wage, wages don't flip over until July 1, I don't think. You know, those annual wage increases. So, I wouldn't let them push you on, gee, we need to pay our workers more now. All this other big overhead stuff, right?
Really good.
We'll let it.
Can't wait.
No, just good. I'm just my son got it off the floor.
Son.
6 miles away.
Oh, yeah, right.
Congratulations. Goes to a place called Cedar Key.
Yeah, right.
Which is about 250 miles up from
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Although
That's the
we're
risk.
going in is bad.
No, I get that. I'm just saying. We're already past. Are we willing to pay for something else?
Airboat,
That's not.
first to see managers.
Just not getting jobs, just guys, Peter Hunter or something like that.
I'm not going to do that. And then do some kayaking.
They have some risk issue. You'd be like, whatever, guys want to work in the winter, make yourself.
Yeah. My wife, I've taken twice. The first issue.
We knew this rubber wouldn't have issues in the winter weather. We'd turn loose.
See if they really want to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Call them up.
The guy was just stunned. He said, "That's your first issue." He goes, "Quit." And then the next time we looked at the next step, you have to do this tournament.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all.
Who would the regulators come after?
What's that?
Who would the regulators come after?
I'm sure we've got clauses.
Yeah.
But it would end up being an argument over whose fault was it the thing didn't work, right?
Yeah, it was a big one.
We'd be like, well, you guys didn't get it here until January, so it's your fault. And they're like, ah, you guys screwed it up somehow, right? Who knows what they would say.
I had one on. I had one on that I naturally.
You let me do the work in the dead of winter.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
It's your fault. You should work. Right.
Didn't get it in.
All right.
Duly noted. And
So we're gonna have a good.
All right. Should we get rolling again?
In here is a, for your next item.
Yep. Okay.
And then,
All right. So we are back from a 5-minute recess in the Board of Directors meeting. Next item is item 7.6, which is commendation of agency counsel, Mr. Richard Shanahan.
why are we doing this?
So rumor has it that Mr. Shanahan is retiring.
Mr. Shanahan is retiring.
You're here.
How does it feel for everyone to clap? I was wondering about that.
Does that mean we're going to get Steve Kronick back?
No, it does not, Dale.
These people
But I'm going to see Steve at a retirement dinner next month, which I'm looking forward to. I haven't seen him in a long time.
Right. Richard?
So, Dick's been with the serving the agency since 2014. As a note of appreciation, I think the board wanted to present a small token of appreciation for the years of service and to say thank you.
Oh, very kind. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah,
Appreciate
absolutely.
that.
I've had the opportunity of working with Dick here for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. I can't remember exactly how long I've been on the board, but it's always been very calm demeanor, knowledgeable, helped guide us through some challenging situations in a few different instances. It was always a great resource, I know, for me as a director, and in my estimation for the agency as a whole. So thank you, Dick.
Appreciate that, Dan.
Yeah. And we have a very high value certificate of appreciation here, assuming the board approves it. Is there any action here? Let's see if the full board authorizes me to sign this before I sign it.
All right.
And then, what's that?
I say let's so move.
Yeah, would anyone like to make a motion to commend Mr. Shanahan?
I move to commend Mr. Shanahan.
Is there a second? All right, motion and a second. Those in favor? Aye. Any public comment?
Yeah, who are you going to pass the baton, Dick, on to Andrew?
That's the plan, but that's also the item that the directors want to talk about a bit in closed session.
Yeah, I'll give you. I wanted to give you a call after our open session before we move to our next closed session to talk about a baseball game, Gail. So I'll do that shortly. Yeah. So thanks, Dick.
Thank you, guys.
Wish you all
Thank
the
you,
best.
Dick. It's been fun.
It's been fun.
Yeah. So yeah, we have this, and we've got another small memento here.
Well, thank you. As I was driving in. I've actually worked for you a lot more than 8 years. I was my first time down this road, which was not Butterfield Drive back then.
Right.
Was 1989, where I came up with Steve Cronick for basically a job interview with Craig Woods, and I'm pretty sure Oz was there. And I've worked with Steve Cronick since '89 as his sort of backup, and then in 2014 sort of started coming up and doing the board meetings. But I go way back with you guys. It's been great pleasure and privilege to work with you, so thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Dick. If anyone else has any comments they'd like to offer, feel free. The floor is open.
I'll just say, Dick, it's been a pleasure working with you. Very professional, great service.
Likewise, Jay, you've done some fun jobs here. I've enjoyed it.
Yep, thank you. So yeah, and that extends even beyond you and your organization. So nothing but the highest respect for you.
And my favorite was probably replacing the pipeline in front of River Range.
Yes.
Heiser. Anyway, I thank you for everything and good luck and enjoy it.
Michael.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, Dick. Okay, next on our agenda is discussion of in-person board of directors meeting for December. So I think at the moment our plan is to not have a December board meeting.
That was my understanding.
Unless something comes up. Other board members, are you okay with deferring, wait until January? And then, I don't know, do we want to talk about whether the January meeting's in person versus remote versus hybrid? I'm assuming we'd want to continue in person. And then we'll make sure to remember that if we have people that are not here with their in-person board meetings, that we properly notice it so that they're covered. Yes. Okay. Any public comment on that?
Yeah, I would be available for our December meeting, but I'm having a knee replacement here in Florida for our January meeting, but I would appreciate being able to attend remotely.
Okay. So noted.
And one thing, just for the directors and staff planning, the governor has indicated that he plans to lift the COVID emergency in February. So your flexibility to have the more easily noticed COVID meetings will probably expire in February.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we'll plan on an in-person board meeting in January. Okay. Great. Okay. Next is department reports. Who would like to start? Operations.
All right, I'll go first. Good morning, Board of Directors. For the Operations Department report for the month of October, all plant waste discharge requirements were met for the month. Plant performed well. We're continuing with the sodium hydroxide addition for neutral pH. The Water Information Management System, WIMS, implementation is ongoing. Cleaned and inspected the iron sponge and replaced the media in the iron sponge. We started the in-house digester cleaning project for the operations. For the lab, staff performed necessary laboratory testing. The Laboratory Information Management, LIMS, implementation is ongoing. Lab staff predict to go live in December with that LIMS system. And staff have completed and prepared the laboratory quality manual and other documents. Next slide, please. Just got a couple of pictures of the projects that we had for the operations department. This was the iron sponge, which is used to remove the hydrogen sulfide from the digester gas before it goes through the boiler system before we burn it, so that it doesn't cause any corrosion. It has an iron sponge media in there, which is basically just a iron oxide wood product that absorbs that H2S. So you can see here that that's the vessel up on top of the digester building. Next slide, please. And then these are just a few photos from the Digester 29 cleaning project that we started. These are the dewatering bins with the dewatering cloths inside of them. And we are probably I'd say about 50% complete with that project. We're trying to get it wrapped up before the snow, but
weren't quite able to do that in cold weather, slowed us down, and we've had a few issues with our new slurry pump that we're working through. But other than that, that's it for the operations department report. Any questions?
Any questions? Seeing none, any public comment on the operations department report?
None from me.
Hearing none, let's move on to maintenance department report.
Okay, so this will be my last month doing the maintenance report. We'll have someone new for you next month, at least on a temporary basis. Completed work orders are there for you to see the numbers. We have about 69 pending in mechanical, 63 in fleet, 23 in E&I, and 22 in IT. So for the month, we continue working on firewall and VPN configuration, Wi-Fi upgrades throughout the facility, continuing to develop a new website, getting closer to rolling that out. State IT master plan, as it was on the agenda today. Continue working on PMs and importing those into Lucid, and then supporting the land LIMS projects, and then supporting the control room upgrade. Did a fuel leak on boiler number 3, keep the boilers running. Did some handrail on the roofs for the roof vents for OSHA compliance. Wrapped up the FLODAR installation on the parallel line. Just now need to get it calibrated, and then it'll be fully in service. Did some roll door repair. We worked on the iron sponge. My ops had it out of service. And then wrapped up Clarifier 1 draft tubes after the coating, and then some shop painting, as you'll see in the photos. So iron sponge work, did the butterfly valves there. IT continues to work on cleaning up some of the older panels in the facility, gutting them of unused items, and just doing general cleanup to make troubleshooting easier. And there's a picture of the draft tubes that were replaced in secondary, and Mark putting on some finishing touches on painting the hallway into the maintenance area.
Richard, your report indicated development of a new website. Is that actually an outward-looking website to replace the current TTSA.net?
Yes, it is.
Website? Yes. I have to say that I use the TTSA.net website, even though Rochelle sends the board packet. It's a good website right now. What is the reason for
that website? I might defer to Paul a little bit because he can give a little bit more detail on it. But I'll say the background behind that website is not really driven towards the type of website that we would have, or yourself at your agency. I can't remember what's the back.
Civic Plus.
But what's it driven towards? I mean, it's geared for a certain industry. The old one.
As far as industries goes, well, it's a .net. First of all, that's one of the biggest problems. But
I just remember hearing the old website was not necessarily geared towards the navigation that we would want. That kind of stuff. So, if you like our old site, you'll really like the new one.
Cool. Good. Okay. Any other? I'm sorry. Were you done?
No. Any other questions?
Yep. Any questions on the maintenance department report? Any public comment on the maintenance department report?
No public comment from me.
Okay. Next would be engineering department report.
Okay, so projects under construction, the scrubber project we talked about at length. The control room upgrades project, we're finishing up on some punch list items. Should be done first week of December. Digital scanning, we're waiting for our deliverables on that. And then the plant coating and roof repair are complete. Punch list is done. And no further field items on that. No projects in bid phase. Next slide, please. Projects in development, the digester improvement study, comments back to the consultant on that. Filter informed condition assessment project, we're waiting on equipment for that one, and additional boiler heating redundancy design project. That one is ongoing. That's the Corolla's assistance with our boiler failure. Maintenance has some parts on order, And we have a plan that's, say, at about maybe a 90% design level. So we're moving forward now. Next slide, please. Photos of the control room upgrades project. This is our AWT control room and lab. And next slide, please. And this is the hallway leading to those rooms I just mentioned, plus the restroom. Any questions?
Nope. Any board questions? Nope. Any public comment on the engineering department report?
None.
All right. Admin department.
So we're still working on the fiscal year end 22 audit. Part of that was we did an inventory walkthrough at the warehouse, and I want to take a minute to commend Jaime again on how well he has that organized. I did not realize it was as big as it is. Michelle attended the CalPERS conference. Thank you. Then for purchasing, we ordered some breast cancer awareness TTSA shirts for the agency. I think that was initiated by Vicki also, and Katie got the purchase order going that the team members wore in October. In the billing department, we had worked with a couple of the member districts to activate some new accounts. We completed an inspection at Tahoe Forest Hospital with TSD. They had a remodel of their second floor, and then completed an inspection of the Tahoe Star Hotel with TSD. Katie's very nice to work with. I'm excited, Michelle. Please. And then this is just a photo of the hospital and the Tahoe Star Hotel for the 2 commercial inspections. We had, looks like some of it got cut off. And then in general, the finance in my area, continued conversations with various financial advisors, investment bankers, and consultants for future needs. I have set up probably about 8 meetings with Richard and myself and various investors, grant specialists, and financial advisors in 2 weeks, and then continued working with HDR for the rate studies.
Great. Any questions on the finance report? Any public comment on the admin and finance report?
No public comment from me.
No public comment. Okay, general manager report.
So continue to collaborate with, as Crystal mentioned, with connection fees. Staff's been implementing new software, as mentioned. Continuing progress on some of the CIP projects. Research leadership training. In fact, Vicki and I have a call tomorrow with a trainer for leadership training. Continuing to work on doing one-on-ones. Been a little bit slow due to some COVID illnesses and contact there. Reviewed and discussed the master plan with staff as we discussed, looking at the projects and talking with some of the supervisors and other managers on what projects we want to move. Discussed heavy equipment and vehicle purchase that we need to plug into the rate study. Planned and coordinated a holiday appreciation dinner that's this Friday. And big thanks to Rochelle. She's done a ton of work on that. Attended a local agency general managers meeting, which was very informative for me since I don't live in the community. That was very enjoyable. Learned a lot. And then continue to do cleanup throughout the plant, and we held a Halloween pop-up.
How was the food?
It's good.
It was spooky.
Any questions from the board? Any public comment on the GM report?
None from me.
No public comment. Okay. So that concludes the management team reports. Next is board of director comments. Any board members have any comments they would like to make for the good of the order? Seeing none?
I was going to just quick three things. One, congratulate Richard again. Glad to have you on board as GM. Looking forward to working with you the next 3 years. Two, thank you for your staff for working with TSD staff on this possible grit removal pilot project. And then also appreciate Jason Hayes, who's apparently stepped up to be involved with the local section of CWEA. It's great to have somebody from TTSA involved at that association in the local section. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yep.
I've got.
Any public comment?
In a moment.
Okay.
I've got one thing. I was contacted by the Truckee Trails, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, and they've been putting together a project around the airport, and Allison Headley contacted me, and she wanted to know if we might be interested in allowing them to utilize some of our property to complete the phase 2, which kind of runs along the bluff over past, looks like behind the bus shed, and that way. And I thought I'd bring it up. And
yeah, so I guess the question is that something we would want to have on a future agenda.
That's, yeah. And the reason I was bringing it up is because when we had talked earlier about creating the overview of areas, this might be something that would fall into that.
Right. So what I would, so thanks for bringing that up. I'm not sure if they've been in touch with staff about this.
No, they haven't.
So that'd probably be a good first step, would be to get them in touch with Richard, and then they can talk. And what's that?
They were in touch with staff, I'd say, in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 years ago.
Okay. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Okay.
Did she catch you at a cocktail party, or did she?
No, I was the NTPUD. She had contacted one of them, and they got hold of me.
Oh, so interesting. Yeah, I would suggest referring her to Richard, and then if there's something that we should be discussing at the board level, then Richard could add that at a future agenda. Okay. Any other board of directors comments? Oh, public comment on board of directors comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I got two comments. Number one, the first comment is for legal counsel. Thank you, Dick, for helping us through all the trials and tribulations of running the agency. You've been just absolutely outstanding. And I, as one director, appreciate everything that you've done for us in the agency, and happy trails there, Bubba.
Thank you, Dal. Very kind.
And the second comment is, with this fire department training facility, what I would really like to do, gentlemen, is I'd like to have this as open board discussion in executive session, if possible. This is a real estate discussion, and I'm a little bit concerned at the direction that this facility could be taking here. And I think that the sooner we establish some kind of guidelines on what we're going to do about this, if we're going to cooperate with, it's not only the fire department, it's going to be a host of other agencies that are going to be using this facilities. And I want to personally be clear on where we're going with this. So as soon as we could put together a closed session meeting where we could discuss this real estate deal and our real estate that we use as a buffer with this agency, I think the better. And other than that, I'll see everybody at the TTSA staff here in the month of December. Sorry I can't make the dinner tomorrow or Tuesday or whatever it is here coming up next couple of days, but have fun without me, and I'll see everybody real soon.
Thanks, Dale. And then maybe I'll bring it back to board comments since I didn't make any yet. So what I might suggest, based on some of the public comment, is that at our January board meeting we have a item on there related to I'll call it third-party use of TTSA property. I think that would need to be on open session, and then whether I don't think we can go into closed session unless we've got actual negotiations around a specific piece of property. I think if we're just talking general philosophy on use of our land, that needs to be open session. I think closed session would be, and I'll ask Dick to interrupt me or correct me, I think is reserved for where you're getting into specific negotiation on real estate deal points.
And involving specific land.
And involving specific.
Not your 900 acres generally, but you've identified 5 or 10 and you want to talk about lease or price or sale terms.
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll go ahead and put an item on open session, and then if we have specific proposals that we're considering with the fire department where we've got details, then those could be future closed session items. Okay. All right, with that, let's adjourn. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll adjourn from open session, and then we'll go into closed session.